Good afternoon, everyone. I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome, everyone, to the Committee of the Whole meeting of Tuesday, November 7th, 2023. Just a reminder that this is a Committee of the Whole meeting and no decisions will be made here today. There will only be recommendations that will go to our next regular council meeting on Tuesday, November 21st, 2023 for consideration. Please note that this will be the last Committee of the Whole meeting for 2023. I need a mover and seconder that the agenda for the Committee of the Whole of Tuesday, November 7th, 2023 be adopted as circulated and with the following amendments. Additions, item 4.4 being a deputation by Michael De Silva. Item 4.5 being a deputation by Linda Rowden. Item 4.6 being a deputation by Wendy Talon. Item 4.7 being a deputation by Sandy Medeiros and Fatima Barbosa. And item 4.8 being a deputation by John De Silva, all relating to Hickory Beach dock licensing, being item 7.1 on the agenda. Deletion, item 6.3 being a presentation by Claire Bazinski of SEMA on the Active Transportation Master Plan. I have a mover and seconder. Deputy Mayor Richardson, Councillor Warren. All in favor? And that's passed. Deputations. Item 4.1, update from the Poverty Reduction Roundtable on affordable housing. Marina Hodson, Jody Schneider-Benz. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Hodson, good to see you again.
Nice to see you. So thank you for your time. I think I know many of you. My name is Marina Hodson. I'm the Executive Director of the Kawartha North Family Health Team in Fenelon Falls and Bobcaygeon, as well as the co-chair of the Poverty Reduction Roundtable. And this is Jolie Scheidler-Benz and Zita Devan, who are my coordinator and one of my committee members joining me today. So I'm just here to sort of give an update on one of the issues that we feel is quite pertinent to poverty and the community as a whole, and that's housing or the lack thereof. So I'm sure if I said the current state of affairs, looks like there's been a lot of growth and continues to be a lot of growth and development in our community. That would come as no surprise to anybody here. And I think we could all agree that generally speaking, such growth and development is really good for the economy of a community. So that's wonderful, except that I think with all change, even positive change, we have to recognize that there can be negative impacts. So a quick example, I recently interviewed a nurse practitioner from the city for my urgent care clinic in Minden, and one of her first questions was what the rental housing market was like in the area. And I had to respond that it can be difficult. The reality is that even professionals cannot afford to relocate to a community and simply buy in an area they've never been to before they've had an experience with the new position that they're coming to move to, right? It can be a very costly mistake for them, so something that they don't want to engage in. So she was looking for temporary rental accommodations. So what's the impact of the current housing shortfall? So as we're all aware, there's a large number of new housing starts and many residents who relocated to our communities over the pandemic as they were able to telecommute, or perhaps they actually commute. It is not them that we're talking about here today, nor am I talking about residents awaiting the social housing, as I know you're already well aware of the long wait lists that they face. What I'm here to discuss is what I refer to as the domino effect. When professionals come to the community in need of rental housing, they have the first choice of the limited stock. They have secure jobs, good incomes, and generally good references. How many of you, when I mentioned that nurse practitioner, thought, isn't Joe down the road? Doesn't he have a vacant rental unit, right? I can tell you that my board members brought forward many suggestions to enable her to relocate to the community. And while that's an admirable demonstration of our community spirit, unfortunately, it often results in these professionals, at least until they choose whether to buy or not, residing in rental units that they would not normally accept. So now that professional is living in a less than desirable unit, at least by their standards. And the person who might be working at Canadian Tire in the garage is bumped out of that very same rental unit because their credit or income is not as good as the aforementioned nurse practitioner. So that mechanic now rents something that he or she wouldn't normally want and bumps the next person off the rental ladder, and so on. We're all familiar with this in the real estate market, especially if you're looking at first-time buyers, but it's no different for renters. And as always, the person with the least money, the least credit, or the least influence falls off the ladder, and we're seeing this in increasing homelessness in our community. So that's the housing impact, but what's the economic impact? As I said before, growth is good for the economy, right? And I would argue that many of the new residents who are building or buying in our communities are working from home or commuting, or they've secured employment here. So they're fine and they're paying their taxes, so what's the problem? When I come to a community, I expect the obvious things: access to healthcare, which is a whole other issue we could talk about, but schooling for my children and things like that. But I also want somebody to change my winter tires, especially when we have early snowstorms, as we've had recently. I want somebody to serve me my Timmies in the morning, and those people have to live somewhere. So here we are, full circle, back to the domino effect. And I know that you all know this, and you might not articulate it the way I just did, but you know what the impact is. So why am I here? Well, I don't like to come with only problems and no solutions, or at least ideas. I really have no solutions. So here's some of the things that we thought of recently off the top of our heads when we met to prepare for this meeting today. And I want to preface this by some of these things might be possible, some might not be possible, and some might already be implemented and we just don't even know about them. This is just showing the kind of things that we're looking at asking for in the future. So for example, is there vacant land that could be gifted for development purposes? City land, obviously. Can you encourage building of rental units by providing tax or development fee incentives, or examining and revising potentially prohibitive bylaws such as setback and parking requirements? Can developers build rental units in the city via the Housing Corporation, take over the landlord responsibilities in exchange for developers receiving a portion of the ongoing rental income? They're often looking to be investors, not landlords. Or are there ways to encourage the rent-to-own opportunities? I do know that we have some of those, but can they be expanded? The only thing that we're really here asking for today is to have a couple people from council to join us in a temporary ad hoc committee to look at the opportunities and the possibilities to improve housing, especially in the rental aspect, going forward in the municipality. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just add a couple of points, please. A couple of things that have been shown to work in other municipalities are to end exclusionary zoning or rethink exclusionary zoning that is typically for primary residents only. The other thing is that speeding up the permit process has showed to be effective through technology, although I would argue technology has got its pros and cons. And definitely, we would like to set up a committee where we are asking for a call to action. These things existed prior to COVID, but have only been exacerbated, and our predictions are dire, and this is based on research. We didn't give you a 30-page backgrounder for a reason. You know, we all know this. Thank you.
Thank you. If you stay at the podium, there may be questions from council. Councillor Warren.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for coming. So this is on top of the regular poverty reduction group. Okay, well, I'd be willing to help you out there. Thanks.
What I would suggest is we also reach out to our human services people and maybe get them involved as well. If I could suggest that you send us either an email or a letter asking us officially to set this up, and then we can respond to the committee and we'll work it that way. Are there any other questions from members of council? Seeing none, can I have a motion to receive the deputation? Councillor Perry, Councillor Warren. No other questions? All in favor? Thank you. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 4.2 on the agenda is a deputation on energy security. Mr. Gene Balfour, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, it's on. Hi, everybody. I want to start just by quickly just showing a nice picture of, this is Councillor Richardson. She's in her greenhouse. And I'm showing it because it's some of my talk is about greenhouses. And so I'm just happy to know that there's at least one member of council here that's directly related to having experience with a greenhouse. So I want to thank everybody for hearing my objections to council's apparent acceptance of the words climate change to signify a significant threat, one that automatically commands government action, legislation, and/or spending. I also am concerned when council votes in favor of jeopardizing our energy security whenever those magic words climate change are invoked. And the example is on August the 29th, two Kawartha Lakes Environmental Advisory Committee representatives made a deputation to this council asking council to oppose the expansion of gas plants in Ontario for reasons of climate change. Nothing specific about climate change, just climate change. And that was Report Plan 2023-04. So I hope council has rejected that request. So the purpose of this deputation, and I'm doing it on behalf of a group called Advocates for Civil Society. So you've been in office now for more than a year, and we'd just like to satisfy ourselves that the constituents that council has the scientific knowledge to competently make decisions on our behalf regarding the hypothesis that climate change is a significant threat requiring government response. I'll refer to this as the climate change theory after this. To me, this is a question of public confidence in our elected representatives that they've got the knowledge to be able to make good decisions. To test your knowledge, I put together 3 questions. And it's also got to determine whether, these questions determine whether you're committing to make the constituents of Kawartha Lakes first in your priorities. And if you decide to answer these questions, please do so. I would like to see it, you could put it on our website, the Kawartha website, and any references to any publications from government institutions that only offer unsubstantiated claims would be inadmissible. I would be looking for a response with published scientific data to respond to these questions. So the questions are very simple. And the first one comes from claims that are associated with CO2 increases that cause forest fires. So according to the Ultimate CO2 Guide for In-House Growing, and that's a website I've included in my deputation, the optimal level of atmospheric CO2 for plant growth within a greenhouse ranges from 600 parts per million to 1,500 parts per million. The current levels in our atmosphere are 415 parts per million. And it's a magnitude, obviously, difference in terms of the amount. So I'd like to find out or ask council if they can answer the following question. How and why plants inside greenhouses do not burst into flames when CO2 levels exceed 600 parts per million? Because clearly if they're saying that there's forest fires caused by increase in CO2, then obviously there must be some repercussions in actual greenhouses. Question number 2 relates to Antonio Guterres. He's the Secretary General of the United Nations. He recently made a public announcement, which we heard in a deputation in late August. We are entering the era of global boiling. So my question relates to, if I can get my pages working here, I'd like to understand why a pot of water doesn't begin to boil inside a greenhouse when CO2 levels reach 1,500 parts per million. Why not? Also, should we trust the United Nations, the IPCC, or any other global body when their leaders make such irresponsible claims like global boiling? Question number 3 is about energy security, which I define as reliable and affordable energy for everybody. And we know now, and I've got a whole list of references here that come with my deputation, we know that green energy sources cannot replace fossil fuels to meet our needs. That's a given. Politically, energy security is everyone's concern, 100% of us. And yet there's only a minority of people who actually believe that climate crisis is real. So will Council prioritize energy security above all else whenever unsubstantiated climate change proposals are presented to it? So I've got 6 proposals I'm offering to you right now. First is declare energy security as top priority over any proposals made that are based on the climate change theory. First proposal. Second is require proof. Reject climate change as this magic phrase that must automatically command your serious attention. Expect verifiable and specific scientific proof that any climate change proposal is taken seriously by a council. Third, stop spending now. We've already allocated all kinds of money towards this climate change thing, but we've done it without any proof. So don't spend any more time, money, or resources on any future subsequent submissions to council that allege climate change to be a problem. And I'm referring again to Plan 2023-04. Finally, represent 100% of your constituents, not just those who believe the climate change theory. Eliminate all ill-informed climate crisis based inside council. Make sure that things are only determined by scientific fact. As I said earlier, if you do decide to answer these things, please do it on our website so that we all know how deep your knowledge of climate science goes, and we have more confidence in your ability to make decisions on, quote, climate change. And finally, I'd like to suggest that I do a lot of reading in this area, and I know there's tons and tons of information out there. And so I'm going to suggest that everybody consider alternative points of view, not just the ones that are coming from the mainstream media, from IPCC, from the United Nations, from government sources. There's a lot of other very good sources out there. And so I've put together a list of only 10, which comes with the, so you'll see them, and you can go through them and see what I've learned. So thanks very much.
Thank you. If you'd like to stay there and see if there are any questions.
Yeah.
Councillor Smeaton.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, through you. I wondered if you had a list of what you considered to be, you referred to the published scientific journals.
Yes.
That would be acceptable. You have that list. Is that part of those? That's not the same as those 10 readings that you have for us.
But there are plenty reputable, like Nature is a reputable one, but there's others as well. And there's in that list, there's several books. There's actually a Stephen Koonin, which is one of the best books that I've seen, and there's a lot of references in that, so I would recommend that you look at that book.
Okay, and so for me, when I hear these your 3 points,
Yes.
the 3 questions you have of us, I can't help but be back in my teaching role,
Okay,
which I enjoyed a lot.
good.
And those types of questions would be how I would field, as Jolie knows, how I would field a classroom. Those would be the questions I would ask, but we would have curriculum delivered that suggests global warming, some of the impacts that you're refuting, and then those types of questions I would present, and the students would engage in conversation because it's important to see, as you put, as much exponential theory as possible, really that type of thinking and challenging the norms and whatever. So my question that I have is, have you ever hosted or thought about hosting a forum with, say, grade 12 students, where it's in a gymnasium, in a school where you know the audience is going to have had curriculum delivered to them that has the research supporting, as you know how I feel.
Yes.
And you're on the podium, and those questions that will be challenging from students who've learned so much, like my classroom was, would be able to be asked of you. So you would say, here's my 3 questions of you.
Yes.
And they've had a month ahead of time to come up with their answers. Some may agree with you, some wouldn't. Has a forum like that ever happened so that I could see the community engaged, not just at City Hall, but the community engaged in answering you, whether it be favorable to you or not?
Yep.
I wondered if that's ever happened, or if you've considered it, or...
I would be happy to do that, but I have a better idea. I'd like right now, in this deputation, I know that the person who's the strongest advocate for climate change as a crisis is Councillor Warren. I would like right now to invite Councillor Warren to be in a public forum and debate climate change with me. I think that would get a much broader exposure, and if she's got the expertise that she seems to have, then it would be a perfect opportunity to show all 78,000 members of this city that she has the expertise to make the kind of judgments that we expect from her. So that's why I'm asking her to do it, because she seems to be the one out of all of you that seems to have the strongest belief in that system. And by the way, I'm not a climate change denier. I wrote a book, and the book is about climate change, and it was published earlier this year. And in that book, I identified 3 types of people. I identified regarding climate change. One type of person is somebody who believes that climate change is a serious matter, and they lobby the government and try to get legislation passed to impose that view on everybody else. That's one type of person. The other kind of person is skeptical. They look at the information, they look at the science as I've done, and I say, I have not been convinced that there's a serious enough crisis that it requires government action, at least the kinds that we're seeing today. So that's the skeptical group. And then there's a third group that they don't really care. I call them the agnostics. And the agnostics are people who go about their daily business. It's a topic they hear about, but they don't waste any sleep over it. And I couldn't tell you how those 3 groups break down. I don't know for sure. I know there's a lot of students have gone through our public system in recent years, and they've been convinced by their teachers that there's a serious crisis. And so I expect that there's a lot of young people who really believe there's a crisis only because the propaganda has been fed to them. But they haven't really gone into and done the critical thinking and the investigation, like Stephen Coonan in his book, to look at it from many, many vantage points. And that's all I'm trying to do, and which is why I've offered to have a public forum.
You can put your request in writing and send it to Councillor Warren, and she will deal with it as she feels she should. Councillor Ashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Belfour. Thanks for your presentation. And one of the things that you had said, like, it's important that I know with myself, like I listen to people on all sorts of political spectrum. The beauty of municipal politics is that you listen to left, center, and right, and that's who you represent. But I listen to and I read websites all over the world. I'll read Fox News, I'll read CNN, I'll read Newsmax, I'll read the India Times, New Zealand Herald, I read the Toronto Star, which actually has some very good investigative reporters. So I read the whole gamut. But what my thing is, and it's important that you read both sides of everything. What I was going to ask you there is that, in your opinion, we're talking about energy self-sufficiency in Canada. I know we import a tremendous amount of oil that we could be using ourselves. I think it's around 650,000 barrels a day. And I've been to these oil fields in Canada, several provinces. Just a few months ago, I was in Manitoba, and a lot of the surface pump jacks there these are local farmers that have their own pump jacks and they're self-sufficient. They contribute to our economy. So the emissions, when we talk about emissions, I'll just narrow it down to that. Like I find that, we've made such tremendous progress in vehicles with emissions, even, diesel, gasoline powered emissions, that you don't see these hazy days that you used to see 20 years ago. But the emissions, have you studied a lot of that as well? Like the improvements that we've made with emissions in vehicles and internal combustion engines? And just a question on that, but thanks for your presentation.
Thanks for the question. I haven't studied automotive emissions other than looking at the emissions of CO2. More because I'm concerned about carbon taxes. Tiff Macklin, the governor of the Bank of Canada, recently said a couple of days ago that if you eliminated all carbon taxes in this country, you would cut inflation by 16%. That's a lot of money. And so And right now, one of the biggest crises that all of you and all of us are facing is the high cost of living. That's the biggest problem. So I focused on, I've done a fair bit of investigation. I have a Bachelor of Science degree. I'm a very, very inquisitive guy around science topics. I've been doing it for years. I know that this atmosphere in this room, you probably know it's 78% nitrogen, N2. You know that it's 21% oxygen. It's 0.9% argon. And CO2 is 215 parts for every million atmospheric molecules in this room. 415 of them are CO2. And those have increased over the last 200 years by 150 parts. So when people tell me that increase over 200 years is somehow affecting something called global warming, and the global temperature that's not a real thing, by the way. Global temperature is a construct of statistics. It's an averaging of measurements of atmospheric temperature. And so I've studied statistics. So if you put a scattergram up front and you show the scattergram of every instance of measurement of temperature, you'd find a broad bell curve, and in the middle you'd find your average, and that's what we call global warming. But it's a statistical average, and if you look at the span of those statistics and how broad they were, you would probably find that outside of the mean, there's probably a variance of at least 5 degrees on both sides. So we're not talking about something that's real, that's measurable. Global warming, or global temperature, is not real and measurable unless you aggregate it, and that's what they do. So we need to be talking about things that are real, not fictions like words like climate change that are nothing more than a catch-all to scare people. We don't need to scare kids. We don't need to go to our classrooms and tell kids that the world can come to an end because we're burning too much fossil fuel. And then we turn around and say, well, we got to stop doing that. And then somebody else says, well, if you get rid of the fossil fuel, you know what you're going to do? You're going to destroy the economy and you won't have any future jobs. So, we got to get this right. And that's why I'm here today. I'm here because I want to know that every one of you, all 9 of you, when you get a statement that climate change is causing all kinds of crises, let's get this right. Let's not just believe the magic of those 2 words. Let's start digging down and finding out what the truth is and what specific problems we're trying to solve. You can't solve specific problems without knowing what they are first. So that's what I'm recommending.
Thank you. Can I have
Any more?
a motion to receive the deputation, please? Councillor Joyce, Councillor Ashmore, all in favor? Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 4.3, speed concerns on Broad Street, Lindsay. Mr. Ray Sarson.
Thank you for letting me say my piece. I'm not much of a talker, but the biggest concerns I have are the people that live on Broad Street and the adjacent streets and the safety of the subdivision. I've seen our town buses doing 60 in a 40, and this happens quite often. And also, there's quite a few cars, not a majority, but quite a few cars that are, in my estimation, doing well over 80. And we have a school up on the north end of Broad, and I just have to bring it to council, because if something happens, then I couldn't live with myself by not saying anything. And basically, I'm just interested in what can be done to slow the speed. And that's it.
Thank you. I think there are several people here who have heard what you had to say, and I believe you've written in and called your counselor, and we will, I think Mr. Kelly is here, and he understands your concerns, and we'll see where we go with it.
Well, I appreciate that, and thanks for looking into it.
You're welcome. Are there any questions for the deputy? Councillor Ashmore.
Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Kelly. I've seen speed bumps in Lindsay recently, one on Riverview Street, which really work good. And do we have the funds, or can we maybe increase this? I know, I don't want to get into too much of the details, like how much we have available for those, but
Can you do this offline? We have the deputant here, and if you have a question
yeah,
for the
I was going to ask
deputant,
if he considered speed bumps, like, you know, if he's
well,
just
if you can talk to Mr. Kelly offline and address questions to the deputant, if you have any. Thank you. Could I have a motion to receive the deputation? Councillor McDonald, Councillor Yeo. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you for coming today.
Well, thank you very much for listening.
Item 4.4 on the agenda, Hickory Beach docking license. We have Mr. Michael De Silva, and he is zooming in today. And I'll remind the folks from Hickory Beach that we are looking for comments on the report, and we shouldn't bring personal issues into it. So, Mr. De Silva, if you're there, go ahead.
Unfortunately, he couldn't attend in person today. Sorry. Nor was he available via Zoom.
Okay, will you be speaking or not?
No, unfortunately, I can't speak to his deposition.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 4.5. Again, Hickory Beach docking license relating to item 7.1 on the agenda. And we have Linda Rowden, and I believe she's here in person. Please come to the podium, and you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. I'm the owner of two homes at addresses number 9 and 11 Pinewood, which my family purchased in 1996. I'm here to correct the public record, challenge false claims by the other party in this dispute, and current recommendation in the city law clerk's report, which contains substantial inaccuracies and no information already shared to the city by me and or the HBDOA, only the complainant. In 1996, we were informed by the real estate agent that there were 2 docks assigned as there were 2 residences, and shown the original dated cement abutments, which, contrary to my neighbor's claim, remain in place to this day. We took occupancy in June 96. All docks, including her 28 and 29, were in place. 27 was empty. We laid claim to the 2 spaces, have used, paid for all materials, and maintained both for the past 27 years, which she acknowledged in the 2018 HBDOA complaint process, with a naturally evolving use based solely on our family's decisions and needs. The law clerk's report wrongfully refers to a transition from public stairs to private dock. This was never public space. We initially installed a set of stairs due to my mother's mobility issues, having a young baby, and mostly as we had a special needs son, knowing this may lead to other community child access, but we're happy for him to have peers. We did so without our since learned knowledge of the potential liability issues attached to our stair placement decision. In 2004, my son purchased a fishing boat, and we shortly thereafter constructed a small wooden lift which sat in front of the stair set for convenient access to his lift and boat. The HBDOA dispute resolution document, which countered a city report, is the only formal complaint on this matter, was in 2018, refers to a new boat lift when this was simply a replacement of the then rotting lift. A Sea-Doo was purchased in 2015. We also shortly after purchased a 4-foot dock section to get rid of the stairs. There was no question we claimed the spaces historically. paid for, maintained, and used the spaces since '96, so there's long-standing historical precedence, no encroachment, and at a time when there was no licensing. Counter to my neighbor's claim, there's never been an independent license situation. Despite her repeated claims and deputations stating she's unable to place a future planned boat lift and or swimming access due to Dock 27, she had a historical boat lift at least to 2018 to the left of Dock 29. She has 2 docks. She has 36 feet, 9 inches of afforded space, including 10 feet, 3 inches of documented and confirmed space between my son's boat and her Dock 28 afforded in the 2018 complaint. For the record, we installed a deck which simply connected our 2 duly afforded spaces, interfering with no one else's use of their dock space, giving ease of full access by others to the park during COVID, and did not know she had any concerns until after her 2023 deputation and subsequent meetings. In the 2018 dispute claim, it occurred right after signing the lease with the city. We actually lost the dispute. We complied to the decision made. An executive member was in attendance and measurements were taken. Of absolute and most essential importance for city decision-making here, in the full 5 years since the formal dispute and lease, she has never enacted the next 2 dispute resolution steps available to her, which she has been repeatedly reminded of, both verbally and in formal documents, and as per the mayor's statement, even by the city. Since her deputation and the city council decisions from the spring, I and the HBDOA executive separately have spent endless hours of our time. I had to address a serious breach of my confidentiality by publishing of my name under the Privacy Act in the first 2023 draft lease. I and the HBDOA had to deal with the further disturbed reactions of the community to a second draft lease, which was released to the community, but not the HBDOA directly. I complied and compiled a very detailed package of material presented at a lengthy meeting. The HBDOA separately shared their information and positions, had to write verification of my information, and both have since had to respond to ever-changing comments, claims from my neighbor. She clearly stated in deposition her entitlement to 2 docks because, quote, in essence, she had 2 places on 1 lot, saying I was entitled to 1, even though I have 2 homes and 2 addresses and have occupied the space since 1996. There was no 2020 claim as per city report. The city sought no input about the deck before said report. Again, offered no fair opportunity from input of facts from me. There are no grounds for a grievance as the deck does not encroach or interfere with her dock space 28 with parkland or public use. None of my HDBOA or HBDOA efforts are even mentioned in the law clerk report to council. The city forgets that in granting the previous lease, they supported the HBDOA and granted self-governance rights, that they required and had accepted the professionally developed, community voted on, and faithfully enacted bylaws, and totally disregard the fact that she won the formal 2018 grievance, was not appeased, but has been granted ongoing and unending audience when she's had a full 5 years of next steps available. I further see she is still being afforded opportunity to speak today when respectfully you, Mayor Elmsley, in our recent meeting said citizens cannot present a 3rd deputation on the same issue to council. So I really challenge her right to speak today. She has
You could wrap up, please. You've
Pardon?
had your 5 minutes. If you could wrap up, please.
Okay. In closing, I'm very distressed but hopeful that the city will take into my account city-accepted lease and self-governments, faithfully enacted bylaws and processes. I and the HBDOA have acted in good faith. I hope the city will simply grant a 5-year lease to a whole group of dock owners. If the city decides to continue on the recommendation of removal of Dock 27, respectfully, I formally request a written letter documenting the grounds for legal encroachment determination. In the alternative, the city could vote to determine self-governance, that 5 years was more than ample time for the complainant shutting down a never-ending stress and duress on my family. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd stay there, and we'll see if there are any questions. Are there any questions for the deputant? Seeing none, could I have a motion to receive the deputation? Councillor Perry, Councillor Smeaton, last chance for questions. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you for coming today. Item 4.6 on the agenda is the Hickory Beach dock licensing, and we have Miss Wendy Talon. Again, you have 5 minutes.
My name is Wendy Talon, and I am a director of the Hickory Beach Dock Owners Association. HBDOA is a group of 39 members who are attaching personal docks to city parkland. In 2016, an inventory of all docks on the parkland was taken and records were created, noting the placement of docks, the address associated with that dock, and the name of the dock owner. Most dock spaces are defined by poured cement pads. Each year, declarations were provided by each member identifying their docks and confirming insurance on their private docks. The member at 7 Pinewood confirmed her dock numbers as number 28 and 29 in her signed declarations in 2018, 2019, and 2020. But in 2022, she added that dock 27 had been added, affecting her sequence. No new dock spaces have been added or reassigned since 2016. When the steering committee took inventory of the docks in 2016, dock space 27 consisted of a wooden dock attached to a poured cement pad and a small boat lift. There were no stairs at dock space 27. A Google Earth photo dated 2015 shows a dock at dock space 27. The steering committee noted the dock was owned by the members at 9 and 11 Pinewood. The member at 7 Pinewood owns a dock affixed to the dock space 28 and another affixed to the dock space 29. In total, this member has the use of 27 feet of shoreline. Many of the members have as little as 12 feet of shoreline assigned to their space. Since the placement of docks is based on historical use and the lease provides for as is, many members have as little as 11 feet of shoreline and some members have as much as 30 feet. In May 2019, the member at 7 Pinewood submitted a formal complaint in writing stating that the owners of Dock 27 had encroached on her space and that she did not have enough room for a boat lift and a boat. The matter was reviewed by directors Brandy Furness and Ken Shipman, and a formal decision was submitted to both parties in writing. The decision was: the parties are both HBDOA members holding occupancy of 2 dock spaces each, which can be combined in any manner to allow adequate space for additional docks and/or structures. Dock space 27 does not encroach on dock space 28, provided that it follows the natural straight line from the poured cement pad at dock space 27. Brandy Furness attended the location of dock space 27 and 28 and measurements were taken. It was determined that the dock and boat lifts at dock space 27 did encroach on dock space 28 by 3 inches. The dock was straightened by 3 inches using exact measurements in a laser level. There is no longer any encroachment by dock 27 onto dock space 28. The written formal decision was provided to both parties and provided information on the appeal process under Section 9 of the Association bylaws. Neither party pursued appeal. In 2020, the members at 9 and 11 Pinewood extended a seating platform to join Dock 26 and 27. This did not in any way affect the space used by the docks at 28 and 29, and still has exactly the same 27 feet of shoreline they had in 2016. The rules of the association, unanimously accepted by the members, state that no member shall enhance their dock or structures on the shoreline or in the water in any manner that may impair another member's use or enjoyment of their dock. This new addition did not affect the existing space used by and assigned to the member at 7 Pinewood, as in the 2016 inventory. In the spring of 2022, I spoke to the city solicitor on the phone about the renewal of the lease. She said that there had been a complaint and would the association find a way to give this person a dock. I responded that this person already had 2 docks. She then asked a question about parking and if there was 6 feet between each dock, which there is, and said there shouldn't be a problem. In the summer of 2022, I met with our councillor, Doug Elmsley, about the renewal of the lease. He advised again that there had been complaints by the same member. I told him this matter had been dealt with in accordance with the association bylaws, rules and regulations, and provided him with a copy of the written complaint, the written response, and the director's decision in writing. He said it appeared
Get you to wrap up, please.
the matter had been dealt with. On behalf of the Hickory Beach Dock Owners Association, I am requesting renewal of the agreement for an additional 5 years under the same terms and conditions as the original lease, based on the fact that the association has not breached any covenants of the original agreement, has dealt with internal issues according to its bylaws, rules, and regulations, and has maintained liability insurance over a period of the original lease. Thank you.
Thank you. See if there are any questions for you. Are there any questions for the deputy? Councillor Ashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, to the deputy. Sort of had a bit of experience in ward to represent with a lot of dock issues. Did you ever have, or did the city ever engage a surveyor to help you out in that?
No.
Do you think that would help the situation to get the shoreline surveyed?
We did discuss with the members at a membership meeting when the issue came up that some members have as little as 11 feet and other members have as much as 30 feet. We did discuss the fact that we could have a surveyor in, we could take the entire stretch of the shoreline, which is about 100 meters, I believe, and divide it by the number of members, and everybody would get equal space. But there were 2 issues with that. One was that there is poured concrete abutments on the shore all the way along this space where people attach their docks. And secondly, that we were really pursuing this based on historical precedent and the fact that these docks have been there goes back, some of them into the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So we decided to leave everything. As a membership, we decided to leave everything as it was.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to receive the deputation? Councillor Perry, Councillor Smeaton.
Thank you.
All in favor? And that's passed. Item 4.7 is Hickory Beach dock licensing, and it's Ms. Sandy Medeiros and Ms. Fatima Barbosa. And the reason why this is on the agenda is because this is a new report. And as a new report, it is considered a first time and not a third time. And that was the decision going forward. So if the deputants are online, your time is now.
Good afternoon, members of council. Please, I do apologize. I am under the weather. I do have Fatima Barbosa right beside me here. I'm just going to keep the screen on myself for now, so I don't want to spread my cold to her.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I do thank you for your time today. With the matter of the dock encroachment for my relative Fatima Barbosa, property owner of 15 Pinewood Avenue in Fenland Falls. The encroachment occurred over 5 years ago after the agreement was taken place with the Hickory Beach Dock Association and the city of Kawarthas. I have submitted 2 letters of testimonies from 2 other neighbors in the community to the clerk's department stating the encroachment occurred after the agreement was in place. The measurements between docks is not all the same. There is definitely an encroachment with Fatima's dock space, as she cannot fit a large boat lift beside her dock number 28. So there is an encroachment there. The owner of 9 and 11 Pinewood, when that property was purchased, the original dock that came with that property was dock number 25, not dock number 26 and 27. So once the agreement was in place, it did state that there was no additions to be done without approval. Docks were moved and added, encroaching into Fatima's dock space without approval by the association. I have also submitted to the clerk's department pictures of the problematic docks that are left on Fatima's property all winter, damaging her grass as well. Fatima has asked for this to stop, but it continues. There was also a concrete slab that was taken from Fatima's dock space and is now used underneath the problematic dock that encroaches. The association communicated to the community some time ago to not touch or remove any concrete from the dock area, but the association is not leading by example. This dock encroachment has been an issue for over 5 years, and it was done in an unethical and unprofessional manner. Fatima and myself are aware of the communication to the executive member of the association to remove dock number 27 by July 15th of this year. The removal did not occur. In conclusion, with dock number 27 placed without approval and done unethically, we ask to have this dock permanently removed due to the encroachment onto Fatima's dock space, and as she cannot fit a boat lift in that area. I thank you for your time today.
Thank you. If you stay on the line, we'll see if there are any questions. Are there any questions for the deputy? Seeing none, could I have a motion to receive? Councillor Perry, Councillor Joyce. All in favor? Thank you. And that's
Sorry,
item 7.1 on the agenda and will be coming up later.
Sorry, can I add one more thing?
Go ahead.
I wanted to add that 15 Pinewood Avenue, when it was the property was purchased over 30 years ago, did come with 2 docks with the property, which was 28 and 29 originally. I wanted to add that to the notes as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 4.8, which is Hickory Beach dock licensing. Mr. John De Silva, and I believe he's on the line. Mr. De Silva is not on the line, so we'll move on. By the way, all of those Hickory Beach Dock Association will be brought forward to the next regular council meeting. Moving on to correspondence, we have concern regarding illegal dumping on privately owned land by Mr. Don Sangster. Can I have a motion that the correspondence be received and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting? Councillor McDonald, Councillor Ashmore. All in favor? Thank you. And now we'll move into presentations. The first presentation is item 6.1 on the agenda. Notice bylaw update presentation. Sherry Davidson, Manager of Communications, Marketing and Advertising. Welcome. Thank you. And whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, Council, it's not news to you that it's been 7 weeks now since we've not had a local printed newspaper. I've been hearing from residents, as I'm sure you have as well. People are missing their local news, their advertisements, their flyers, their connection to the municipality and to each other. But we're not alone. There's been over 70 other communities that have also lost their printed newspaper, smaller communities and neighbors like Brock and Clarington, and also larger urban centers like Burlington and Oshawa, to name a couple. In a recent survey that we did through the Did You Know campaign, the local newspaper was one of the top ways that residents want to receive their information. So although there is still an online version of our paper, and we are very fortunate to still have an excellent local journalist that covers our issues, that online is behind a paywall. Thank you. So you may have experienced, if you want to read more than 3 articles in the course of a month, you need to sign in and pay a subscription. As you can imagine, some older residents are disinclined to access information online, and even more so, to pay a fee is a deterrent for them. So without a doubt, we have had a disruption in reaching our residents over recent weeks. Thank you. So today, in coordination with our clerk's office, I wanted to bring a brief update about how several areas of city business are impacted by legislation that currently notes that public notice must be given through a printed newspaper. And so today we're focusing on those legislated notices, which represents about 10% of all messages that the city puts out. And so you're looking at an example of one, which is a proposed road closure and sale. There are others, and they're all currently found on our website under public notices. Prior to discontinuation of the printed paper, we would also put typically a large, almost a full-page ad in the local newspaper, right on the back page, known as the municipal bulletin, and that's where residents would find these types of notices. Next slide, please. So what will this mean for the future of public notices? At the next council meeting, you'll see an amended notice bylaw, which will deal with a variety of notices and how they'll be treated. Today's agenda has an updated heritage policy to address their notices. And other examples that you'll see coming will be planning notices, election notices, environmental assessments, and more. So we've been watching closely, and some signs point to a digital-only solution as the norm. So the AMCTO, which is the Association of Municipal Clerks and Treasurers of Ontario, has asked the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, in the absence of a printed newspaper, whether municipalities are in compliance when they post a notice online only. So we're waiting for that clarification. Some other municipalities are also looking to the province to agree that posting digital only is acceptable as far as provincial legislation. So one of the more recent was the Township of McKellar. Their council passed a resolution calling for an amendment to the Legislation Act, which is an Ontario Act, allowing digital publications as an acceptable means of public notice. Next slide, please. Here in Kawartha Lakes, we've decided on an above and beyond approach to providing the public with access to this information. So what we've got is a 2-step process. First, our municipal website is the anchor of all of our communications, and notices will be posted online in all cases. Beyond that, we'll take additional actions depending on the subject and where and how many residents are affected. So where a subject impacts the entire municipality, we will post notices at our 4 service centers and at applicable libraries throughout. We'll post those notices in hard copy now, and in the new year, our customer service group is looking at digital monitors so that we can have notices available in all of the service centers, rolling out slowly as appropriate, but making sure that when people come in, it's an accessible way that they can see and notice, reduce clutter, and make that an easy spot for people to locate notices. And then beyond that, we're going to leverage social media to spread the message further. We don't typically post these types of messages on social media as they're very legislative, difficult to understand, but we are going to make it easy for people to know what the notice headline is, and if they want to find out more information, send them to our website. So we currently reach about 20% of our residents on social media now, and that's a no-cost option to the city, and it does reach many of our seniors, particularly on Facebook. So here we can post those notices and drive them back to our website. Once they get there, they'll also learn that they can easily subscribe if they want to have more news like that and stay connected to the city. Finally, we'll post certain notices, again, depending on the subject and the scale, on third-party media, of which we have a number of options. So we can look at options across print, radio, television, roadside signs, and direct mail. So next steps to ensure that we keep our community informed. As I mentioned, you're going to see some policies and bylaws come to you shortly. We're also focusing on making sure the public are aware of how to stay connected to municipal news and notices. So one example is this ad that's running in the Lindsay Advocate now, driving people to sign up at our website for exactly the news that they want. The public notices section is more prominent on our website now. If you go to the home page, there's a little button for public notices, and it will take you right to that 10% realty services sales and other items that the public may be interested in, and they can also go to the newsroom to get the other 90% of our messages. So alongside the Kawartha Lakes strategic plan, we're refreshing our corporate communications strategy, and we'll bring that to council in the new year. And this will take into account the loss of the printed paper and the strategies that we're using to ensure that we reach all of our residents. So more on that later. We recently, when we did the Did You Know campaign, we surveyed, asked residents how they wanted to receive information, what's working, what's not, what they like, what they don't like, how our website's working, all that good stuff. That will be excellent intel. We'll go into the strategy and we'll bring that back to you in the new year. But for now, a final note about this publication. This is the once-a-year municipal calendar that we put out. It's traditionally been delivered throughout the community to about 70 different locations, so a mix of retail and municipal locations where residents can go in and pick up a copy. The last 2 years, we've had it inserted into Kawartha Lakes this week, so residents were receiving it at home. Now that that's not an option, this year we're going to have it delivered by Canada Post, direct to homes, businesses, and apartments around the second week of December. So we'll have a public campaign to let people know that they can look for that in the mail. They can also find it in those retail and municipal locations that they're used to going into. That helps drive traffic into our businesses and into our community partners. So we'll keep doing that, and we'll let everybody know coming up shortly that that's on the way. So that's my update at the time for public notices. I'm happy to answer any questions, or certainly our city clerk might need to answer some questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I got a line up here. Councillor Smeaton.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, through you. Just a quick question. If the resolution in McKellar were to come back that they're upholding the Planning Act as it stands now and that advertising of certain things has to be in print, is there the possibility of the back pages, the what did you call them? The municipal bulletin, sorry. So land severances, those sorts of things. Might they come in the mail along with the other flyers that are still coming? Like as the newspaper's been canceled, we're still getting our Canadian Tire flyer and our Giant Tiger, et cetera. So certain organizations are sending their flyers regardless of being neatly inside a newspaper. If the Planning Act is upheld and this is the end of the story, sorry, but the law is the law, which probably won't happen because if we're talking 70 municipalities that are in the same situation, but is that a possibility that those municipal pieces, the bulletin, might still be in print?
So through the mayor to the councillor, your question is, could we put our legislated notices in a flyer pack, whoever it's being distributed by? It's not Metroland Media. The answer is no, that would not qualify for a legislated notice. There's a definition of newspaper that it would not meet, so.
Councillor Ashmore.
Thank you. Through you to Sherry. Have we approached the Standard newspaper because they are looking at delivery now in Kawartha Lakes? They're expanding from Durham region. Have we entered into any negotiation with them? And also Canada Post. Canada Post has always been there, and they're owned by us, taxpayers, Canadians, and you know, I found over the years that their service is actually quite improved, and and they're steadfast, they're dependable. And have we ever thought about engaging them more?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, yes, Canada Post is the premier delivery solution, and we are engaging Canada Post for the mail out of our calendar this December. We do use them for our tax bills that go out twice a year, and we will continue to look at ways throughout the year that we can channel our advertising into Canada Post and other certified delivery. Your first question about the Scugog standard, yes, we are in contact with them. I know there was efforts to increase their distribution. At current, they don't qualify for a local newspaper on a couple of fronts. One is their maximum delivery at this point is about 2,500 households, and that's, most of them are outside of Kawartha Lakes. So we've got some drop boxes in and around Lindsay, and Little Britain, some pockets throughout Kawartha Lakes, but there's not enough distribution to be considered a local paper, and they're not a weekly paper, which again is another one of the points in the definition for public notices.
Thanks. And the final question was the Bill C-18, how does that affect us? Because I know that with Meta, and they're not allowed, they've made changes. Google now, as of the end of the year, you will not be able to post Canadian links, and they're talking about paying for links now. How is that affecting us? Because I know it's affecting a lot of people, but are we, and it's affected a lot of local publications like Kawartha 411, Kawartha Promoter. Those are great publications that were always there, and the Lindsay Advocate as well. That had you could get your news through Facebook, as the main example. But how have we found that have we used social media, I guess, as a way to get our news out?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, yes, that bill has had a significant effect, almost a double whammy effect on our local media newscape. As a city, we are not blocked. We can share our news on social media, and we do. So we continue to build that message to the public that if they're looking for municipal news, our website is the newsroom, our social media channels are where to dial in. From time to time, we do try to share local media articles with the public, but unfortunately on social media, they're usually blocked.
Okay.
Councillor Warren.
Through you. Thank you, Sherry. And I think I have talked to you about this before, but maybe I do a newsletter that goes out once a month, and maybe communications can work with councillors to do that, and they're besides your own Facebook page, you can send it out to, like Bob Cajun has 4, right? So you can like bang, send it out to 4 Facebook pages, or more actually. So just thinking, working with council to work on newsletters for their specific wards, with all that information that needs to be put out there. Just a suggestion.
Councillor Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just a real quick question and then a comment. And you said select library branches. Why not all of them?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, there's 1 or 2, and I can't recall which ones in particular, that just don't have the counter or wall space to accommodate the type of frame we're looking for to post up those notices. But with working with the library CEO, we'll make sure that we have coverage geographically, particularly if it's a citywide issue.
I'm on the library committee, so I'll bring that issue up and we'll fix that problem.
Okay. Thank you.
And the other comment I have is you know, the old supply and demand. We have a vacuum here, and it's, who knows, maybe the standard will fill that gap. I know they're every other week, but we can then change our own rules that they're not weekly, but if we change our rules to say it's okay for a bi-weekly, semi-monthly. Anyways, just a thought. we'll have to see where that goes. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a motion that the presentation by the Manager of Communications regarding an update on the notice bylaw be received and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting? Got Councillor Ashmore and Councillor Perry, all in favor, and that passes. We'll take 5 minutes, folks. To order. Item 6.2 on the agenda, Heritage Conservation District and Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategies. Emily Turner, Economic Development Officer. Whenever you're ready, Emily.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. All right. So you're all used to seeing me on Zoom, so I'm here in person today to go through. Yes, I'm here in person today. Yes, so you can all see how short I am. So we're going to go through a couple of strategies that are on your agenda today. I'd just like to walk council through them so you have an idea of some of the background, why we're bringing these forward, and then some next steps coming out of these as well. And yes, the remote works great. Okay, so this is just the presentation overview, what we're going to go through today. Just what are cultural heritage landscapes for anyone who's not really familiar with that. Our legislative and policy framework, our current status of these here, why we actually need these strategies to begin with, an overview of those, and then next steps as to where we're going. Okay, so we'll get into the meat of the presentation. So what are cultural heritage landscapes? So cultural heritage landscapes, or CHLs, which is what you'll see in the presentation, since that's a kind of mouthful there, are heritage assets that include a collection of resources that work together as a cohesive whole. So when we're talking about heritage properties, we're usually talking about a house or a commercial building. Cultural heritage landscapes are much larger than that. So there might be a house or a commercial building, but there's also other things on that property or properties that contribute to a wider heritage landscape. So each element might have its own heritage value. Say if there's a house and a barn, those may be have heritage value on their own, but together they form this cohesive heritage whole. These are recognized at provincial, national, and international levels in legislation and policies. I think they were first recognized by UNESCO in the 1970s. So these have been around for quite a long time, and they've entered into Ontario Heritage Dialogue a little bit more recently than that. So cultural heritage landscapes, they're very complex. They have lots of different elements in it, and it really depends on the kind of landscape that you're looking at. So landscapes may have all of these things, they may have two of these things, but they're going to have different elements to them. So the first are built heritage attributes. Those are your regular things that you think of as being heritage structures, buildings, archaeological resources, engineering works like roads and bridges. Spatial organization, boundary indicators, fences, hedges, that kind of thing. Then we get into our natural heritage attributes. So that's vegetation, landforms, water features, ecological features. So our big water feature here is the Trans Severn Waterway, and that's part of a CHL I'll talk a little bit about later. And then we have our intangible heritage attributes. So these are things that we don't see in the landscape but are related to it. So this would be traditional or present use or practice that happens there, views or visual relationships, or relationships to traditional knowledge, crafts, arts, folklore, anything that's not a physical thing but is related to that space particularly. So we have lots of different kinds of cultural heritage landscapes. They can be very small and they can be extremely large. So they can be contained on one property. Often when you think of things like farms, cemeteries, estates, those are cultural heritage landscapes on a single property. However, most of them that we'll encounter span multiple properties. They're over larger areas. Some of these have delineated boundaries and some of them don't. So it can make it very complex to how we talk about these and evaluate them, but there is some method to it. So there's three different kinds of cultural heritage landscape. The first are designed landscapes. These are designed specifically by humans. They usually have well-defined boundaries and align with specific aesthetic trends. They're usually really easy to identify, things like estate houses and gardens, parks, planned communities. Some of these are on single pieces of property. Parks are a very good example, though we do have quite a few in this region. Evolved landscapes are the most common type of landscape. They're initiated by a human imperative, so humans got going on it, but they've evolved gradually over time. So this is the kind of one, it started, say 150 years ago, but it's changed over the past 150 years. Then there's also two subtypes of those. The first is a relic landscape, and those that have stopped changing. So ghost towns, great example of those. A town developed, no one lives there anymore, and it just kind of exists in stasis. Continuing landscapes, these are the ones that retain an active role in human society and continue to evolve. We have lots of these in Kawartha Lakes, and they're very important to our culture and our landscape here. So our downtowns, our residential areas and neighborhoods, our villages and hamlets, and our farms. These are some very good examples that we have quite a few of, and you can see them as you drive around very easily. The last kind is the most abstract kind of landscape. These are associative landscapes. Their value lies primarily in religious, cultural, or artistic affiliation to natural landscapes and features. A lot of them have few or no built elements in them at all. Some of these include sacred sites in nature. So some of our Indigenous communities, they have associative landscapes in this region that are related to their sacred knowledge and traditions. Water bodies, mountain landscapes. So if you think of, say, Banff National Park, that's a good example of an associative landscape because of its artistic and aesthetic attributes that don't really have anything to do with the buildings that are there. All right, so moving on to heritage conservation districts. This is something that we're a little bit more familiar with. We have two of them in Kawartha Lakes, and we discuss them at council from time to time. All heritage conservation districts are cultural heritage landscapes. They're collections of different properties and resources that are culturally related to one another. This is the most common mechanism for protecting large cultural heritage landscapes in Ontario, because there is a framework under the Ontario Heritage Act to do so. It protects CHLs through the adoption of an area-specific plan that guides growth and change with a heritage lens. So when we designate a heritage conservation district, council adopts a plan which goes through how that area is going to grow, how we're going to preserve those heritage features, and how we evaluate the process for doing those two things together. There are nearly 140 heritage conservation districts on Ontario, and they're a whole bunch of range of sizes. So the first one, most people probably think it's somewhere like Niagara-on-the-Lake. It's not. It's in Mississauga, which is kind of a surprise. In 1980, we don't often think of Mississauga and heritage, but there you go. They did a good job quite a number of years ago. Our residential and downtown HCD designations are the most common. We have some of those here, but there are also HCDs in Ontario that protect more diverse resources. HCDs are not always the best resource or the best mechanism to protect things that are not downtowns and residential areas, but sometimes they do work. So Fort York in Toronto, that a lot of people have been to, is a heritage conservation district. The other one that's kind of neat is the Lambton Oil HCD, which protects a whole range of old oil infrastructure in Lambton County, it's a very interesting heritage district, but we won't go into that today. All right, so why do we protect cultural heritage landscapes? These form part of our everyday living landscape, and I think that's a really important thing to remember when we're talking about these are living resources. We live in these every day, they change, and they reflect what our communities are doing. They contribute to the understanding of our communities, their history, and their continuing use. And a lot of them are extremely integral to local culture and cultural practices. So the example that I always like to use when talking about living cultural heritage landscapes are our agricultural properties. We have lots of agricultural properties in Kawartha Lakes, and farming is extremely important to our local economy. However, it's also really important to our local culture. Those farmsteads that are there and the farmers who work on them, they have cultural practices that have led to specific built forms, natural forms that we take for granted when we're driving around Kawartha Lakes, but they're extremely important to our communities and understanding their history. So looking at protected CHLs in Kawartha Lakes, we have a number of these. So we have two HCDs, as you know, so downtown Lindsay and Oak Street in Fenelon Falls. We have several cultural heritage landscapes that are on individual parcels that have been individually designated. A couple of those are rural church and cemetery landscapes. We actually have quite a few of those. And we also have a couple of farm properties that are protected in this way as well. We also have the Trent Severn Waterway, which is our largest cultural heritage landscape in Kawartha Lakes, but it is a federal designation and not a municipal one, so we don't manage it, but it is here, and it's important to recognize that that's in Kawartha Lakes. However, most of these are neither identified or protected, and that can be problematic when we're looking at how we manage these in the long term and looking at our wider landscape within Kawartha Lakes. There is the potential for a lot of these as we go through Kawartha Lakes. Some of these have already been identified through the Heritage Inventory. So just as a reminder, our Heritage Inventory project, it was initiated in 2022, and it's an ongoing project to identify heritage resources in Kawartha Lakes, whether that's residential buildings that have some heritage value, or commercial downtowns, or some of these wider heritage landscapes. So some are really obvious that they're cultural heritage landscapes. Things like our downtowns, they have lots of historic buildings in them. They form a whole. We know what the boundaries are. While others require a lot more research to fully understand their scope and the nature of their resources. So the example I use here is our historic logging landscape. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation. We have a lot of resources related to historic logging in Kawartha Lakes that together form a very important CHL, but it's a huge one and requires a lot of research to understand how we're going to deal with that going forward and planning for the future. So all of this is underpinned by some legislative and policy framework. These are all at a provincial and then a local level. So the main one that we talk about all the time is the Ontario Heritage Act. It is our main piece of legislation. There's also information in the Planning Act regarding CHLs. And the protection of heritage resources, the provincial policy statement, and the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which will soon be combined into the new provincial planning statement when we get it. They speak in more detail about our policy framework for protecting CHLs for community benefit, as well as our official plan. So our official plan does not specifically speak to cultural heritage landscapes, but it does speak to the preservation of resources more generally, as well as the designation of heritage districts. Okay, so our current heritage context. There's a lot of stuff going on right now, as I'm sure everyone knows from the massive amounts of heritage items that you're getting on your agendas these days. We have our heritage inventory that I mentioned, and we're getting some very large data sets out of these. We've been working through them in our various communities, and we are identifying a lot of historic properties, as well as a variety of cultural heritage landscapes. We do also have a lot of legislative and policy changes coming through at the provincial level. So we have Bill 23 that we've talked about fairly extensively, the new PPS, as well as other bits and pieces of legislation that we get from time to time. At the same time, we are having significant projected growth in the city. This is not a bad thing. We need new houses, we want new residents, but we need to think about how we balance that growth with protecting the things that are important that are already here. So all of this data and these changes that we're getting, we need to use it to make informed decisions about heritage planning in the long term. So we're not just making, reactive decisions. We want to have a plan and how we're going to deal with this going forward. So why do we need strategies? So this work goes on behind the scenes all the time, as you know by the things that you get in your council agenda or items that you participate in. However, strategies are important because they provide transparency for the public and council. So when we make decisions about heritage, when staff bring forward reports, when council are discussing it, having strategies to underpin the work that we're doing makes it very clear for the public what we're doing and why we're doing it. So that includes what has heritage value in the city, how we prioritize resources, what tools we use to protect it, and how we engage with the community. In the end, looking forward to long-term work planning, this provides some direction. So when I'm looking forward 1 to 5 years in the future, these strategies will help guide the work that I'm doing and the things that I'm bringing forward to council for discussion. A lot of times at the municipal level, we have very large strategic plans that we bring forward. That has not been the approach with heritage. My approach for this has to bring forward several individual strategies, including the 2 that are here in front of you, the Heritage Inventory Framework that you received in 2022. And the reason for this is to respond to the changes with more flexibility. There are a lot of changes that happen in heritage all the time, coming particularly from a provincial level, and having those individual strategies means it's a little bit more dynamic in terms of how we work with those. It also means we can be a little bit more nuanced, and it's easier for people to access. Instead of getting a 100-page heritage strategy, there's a 15-page heritage district strategy that you can actually read, and it's easier to find things. So I'll just give a quick overview of the two strategies. This is our cultural heritage landscape one, and it's the HCD one feeds off of this one. So we have our legislative and policy framework that we've already discussed, our types of CHL already discussed here as well, goals for preservation, identification, evaluation, our tools, and how we do community participation and engagement. So there are quite a few goals for cultural heritage preservation. These have been identified as high-level goals in the strategy. And there's a few of them just sort of summarized quickly here. So the first is ensuring important urban, hamlet, and rural landscapes are identified, evaluated, and preserved. So we have landscapes in all three of those areas in Kawartha Lakes. They're very different, but they're all important. Using appropriate mechanisms under provincial legislation and policy to protect CHLs. Designation is not always the most appropriate mechanism, so we need to investigate what those appropriate mechanisms are and use them where it's appropriate. Promote and support unique senses of place through the protection of CHLs, supporting and promoting historic and ongoing tradition and way of life, which is something that cultural heritage landscape preservation does as an extension. Utilizing protection mechanisms to support the living nature of CHLs and allow for dynamic land use and growth. So we do need to recognize that these will change. We are having new residents move in, new housing, new commercial areas, and that's great. So we need to balance that with our cultural heritage planning. Extending on that is promoting new development that's sensitive to CHLs and ensuring evaluation of CHLs is undertaken as part of the land use planning and development processes. So identification and evaluation, these are very complex. It's not like, walking down the street and seeing a lovely Victorian home. As I mentioned before, some of them are very obvious and some of them need a lot of study to figure out where they are and how they relate to one another. However, they can be identified from a variety of sources, whether that's members of the public, council, staff, or a municipal heritage committee. These should undergo an initial evaluation using Ontario Regulation 906, which is how we do all of our heritage evaluations to ensure consistency across the municipality and the province. And it needs to include tangible and intangible heritage attributes and its geographic definition. For some, that's very easy, and for some, that requires a little bit more work. So we have lots of tools for CHL preservation, and they can be divided into direct and indirect protection mechanisms. So our direct protection mechanisms are ones that place very specific protection mechanisms on a cultural heritage landscape and identify its next steps or the mechanism to do so. So we have listing, Part 4 designation, Part 5 designation, which is heritage conservation districts, heritage easement agreements, and official plan provisions. So this council, I think you're fairly familiar with the first three of those. The last two are things that we don't use very often, but are certainly good tools when appropriate. Heritage easements agreements are primarily used as part of development proposals to negotiate between the property owner and the city as to how to protect cultural heritage resources as part of new development. And then the last is using provisions in our official plan. We don't have any at the moment, but it's certainly an area where we can use them to identify and protect CHLs where warranted. There are also lots of indirect protection tools, and these are also often more appropriate. So sometimes we have other policies that indirectly protect CHLs without using the words cultural heritage landscape ever. So this can include things like secondary plans, where we put in place guidelines for new development and architecture, community improvement plans, area design guidelines, property area or corridor management plans, zoning provisions. Zoning provisions are actually a very effective way of protecting CHLs. By establishing things like setbacks and heights, particularly in residential areas. community planning permit system provisions, demolition control bylaw, subdivision development agreements, and public education and interpretation. And I'd just like to flag this last one. Public education is a really important part of protecting landscapes in Kawartha Lakes, because often people, and by often I mean very often, people here know the things that are important to them, and with additional public education will do a lot of that preservation and heavy lifting on their own. There's lots of people who want to preserve those things in Kawartha Lakes, and we don't necessarily need to put heavy policy provisions in place to make that happen. Community consultation and engagement is something that is really important for CHLs, particularly for larger ones, but it really depends on what you're doing with them. So for some, such as the designation of heritage conservation districts, there are legislated community engagement provisions that we have to follow. For others, we need to take a more dynamic strategy, just really depending on what they are. But it works best when the community is engaged. And the strategy commits the city to a range of outreach activities where appropriate, and there's a whole variety of different things that we can use depending on what that is. All right, so the second one. This one relates directly to the CHL one, as heritage districts are cultural heritage landscapes themselves. Once again, we have our legislative and policy framework, which is very similar. Our goals for designation, our process for area nomination, direction for prioritizing areas, an overview of provincial criteria, direction on amendment and repeal, and direction on community participation and engagement. So it's a very similar strategy, but it is a little bit more down in the weeds because heritage districts are a defined process that we have to follow under the Ontario Heritage Act. So we have a few different goals that have been identified, and in HCDs, this has been broken out for urban, hamlet, and rural areas because there are unique needs in each of those. In general, the goal is to identify, support, and enhance unique heritage landscapes throughout the city. However, our urban goals, we're understanding that a lot of growth is going to happen in these areas, so we want to support preservation while balancing growth. Hamlets, we know there's also going to be some growth happening in these areas, and the intention here is to preserve small communities as distinct areas, so with your commercial core and your residential area surrounding it, while still allowing for thoughtful growth supporting that core area. Rural goals are intended to identify key rural themes in areas where preservation is warranted, so that would be things like agriculture or tourism, which we have a lot in our rural areas, and direct major development away from those areas to preserve those specific landscapes. So one of the things that we've had quite a bit of discussion about, particularly in light of the Old Mill Heritage District process, is how we get area nominations. We can get nominations from a variety of sources, whether that's directly from council, council direction, the Heritage Committee or staff proposing areas for designation through our various studies, or requests from members of the public. When we get requests from members of the public, this strategy identifies what they have to provide, which is, there's 4 key things. A rationale for investigating the area, preliminary research, proposed boundaries, and an indication of level of support from the community. We have to have those things if the public nominates an area for an HCD, so that we have a very clear idea of what's going on in the community with this particular nomination. There's discussion around petitions in there, which will provide additional clarity for community members who are looking to pursue this kind of item. If we're bringing them from city sources, we're going to do those same sorts of things as well. We're not going to petition people, but we will be doing that rationale, the research boundaries, and doing some outreach into the community to identify levels of support. And it should be noted that nomination as an HCD doesn't guarantee future designation. So people can bring these forward, until the cows come home, but unless it's an appropriate area for an HCD, then the recommendations from staff will not necessarily be to designate the area. And each will come forward to council on their own as they progress over however many years we're doing these for. We also need to prioritize areas for study. We don't have the resources to undertake tons and tons of HCDs. Places like the City of Toronto are doing these studies all the time. We can't do this. We have limited financial resources and 1 staff member. So that needs to be kept in mind when we're looking at HCD designation. And we have decided to work on a priority list. This is something I've discussed with our Heritage Committee members, and it's attached to your report. Just as an extension of what we talked about on the last slide, the priority list is just areas that have been identified for potential HCD study. It does not mean that they are going to become HCDs in future. It's just ones that are being looked at at some point in future. For transparency and fairness, we do have a prioritization framework, which includes a whole variety of things. So availability of data, level of community support, geographic representation, so we don't have all of our HCDs and focus in Lindsay effectively, uniqueness of resources, alignment with our goals, our known or anticipated development pressures, a concentration of listed property, and availability of staff resources. So we use criteria that's been established by the province, and that's in the strategy, and we will continue to use those until the province changes their mind. There is also some new direction in the Ontario Heritage Act regarding amendment and repeal of HCD plans. We're waiting on additional regulation from the province, but there is wording in the strategy as to when we may consider one of these things. The intention is for staff to review these at 5-year intervals to ensure they're still relevant. An amendment or repeal may be contemplated in a number of circumstances. So if there's significant changes to the heritage value of the district, whether there's substantial development or a natural disaster. So for example, if downtown Lindsay were to burn down, we would revisit the HCD to see how that related to our reconstruction. That's a very extreme example, but that's what we're talking about here. Identification of new information that significantly alters the heritage value of a district, or correction of errors in administrative updates. We are also committed to community consultation for HCDs. The Heritage Act requirements are really bad for community consultation. We're only required to do one public meeting. That's it, which is not good enough. So best practices here and in other municipalities really identify doing lots of these as the best way to do an HCD. So the strategy commits the city to doing that, to go above and beyond what the legislative requirements are, and to do a variety of community outreach through things like public meetings, community advisory groups, digital and direct mail engagement, or a whole variety of engagement tools that we use for these kinds of things, surveys, discussion boards, mapping exercises, so on and so forth. So this really lays out the fact that we are going to do more than one public meeting, which we have done and will continue to do. So there's just a couple of examples here that I've touched on these, just a few things where we might be looking at doing some preservation. So the first is with our farmsteads. There's lots of these, and some of them may warrant protection, depending on a whole variety of factors. For these, we would generally pursue a Part 4 designation, which is an individual designation in consultation with the owner, or in our broader policy supporting agricultural lands, of which we do have quite a few in our various policy documents. We also have a variety of commercial downtowns, and these are our continuing landscapes. They have lots of buildings. They're very important to our local economy, to bringing in tourists, supporting our small businesses, and we want to keep these intact and looking good. These are often best protected through HCD designation, and that's generally the mechanism that we'll probably pursue with this kind of landscape. The last is when we're looking at more complex landscapes. So this is our historic logging landscape that I mentioned earlier. It's significant, complex, and very large, and effectively covers a whole range of natural and built features that supported the Kawartha Lakes economy throughout the 19th century. It extends across non-contiguous properties and a lot of different things. This sort of landscape is best protected through a mix of various initiatives. So whether that's Part 4 designations, heritage district designations, policy initiatives, and public education. So this is an important part of our history, but we can't just sort of designate an HCD. So this will require some complex and sort of creative thinking in terms of how we protect and promote this. Okay. So next steps, this is our end here. So the next step is looking at the adoption of the 2 strategies that are in your report. We have also initiated early planning stages for a potential HCD in Bobcaygeon at Market Square. This is something that was mentioned when we discussed Bill 23 early in the year, and this is sort of very, very early stages at the moment for this. We'll continue to identify cultural heritage landscapes through the heritage inventory, which is ongoing and is probably a 5 to 10 year project. And then we'll also begin to apply strategy recommendations to various city initiatives. So it's likely that council will see some more of these coming forward, discussing CHLs, potentially some new HCDs, and we will we'll get there when we get there to preserve all these. And that's it. Okay, there we go.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions here for you. Deputy Mayor Richards.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. And I do apologize for missing part of the meeting today, but sometimes in life you need a timeout, so I had one today. So thanks. Just a couple quick questions. Emily, great presentation. It's really fulsome. I just want to get it clear in my mind. So Bill 23, they pushed out those new requirements through the municipality that you have to designate listing those properties or remove them from the registry within a 2-year window, right? And so we're following the provincial amendments through the Ontario Heritage Act. Where would we be in that timeline? Like, how far are we in that process?
So the timeline provided to us under the Bill 23 legislation was 2 years from January 1st, 2023. So we're more or less halfway through that 2-year window. Properties will be automatically removed from the register January 1st, 2025. That being said, we can still designate properties after that date. We can still work through things like heritage conservation districts and cultural heritage landscapes. We just don't have any listed properties. So we use listing to sort of protect things in the interim while we deal with other stuff. And those properties just won't have any of that kind of interim protection at that point. So it really marks a stage where if we have a sort of a demolition come forward for one of those properties, that's it. There's nothing we can do about it. But we could continue to designate properties after that date.
Thank you, and that kind of clears that thought up in my mind. Also, I mean, moving forward in the agenda today, we have a lot of proposed designations, and it's good to hear that we're moving to a higher level of engagement to our residents when we're providing those notices. That one is that sending out notice, right? And that's adhering to the legislation process change in the bylaw, which will help the heritage notice process, right? Because we're not there right now. We don't direct mail notices as of right now, right?
We do. So there are a whole bunch of different kinds of, there's a lot of different direction in the Heritage Act for different kinds of heritage protection. So if we're designating an individual property, which we have quite a number on our agenda today, we send out, in the Heritage Act, it has to come forward to council. Council makes a recommendation, then we send out a formal notice, which we do already. And we had also had to publish a notice in the newspaper, which we can't do now because we don't have one. So the notice report is to move that online, as was discussed in the last presentation. And then if there are objections, we deal with those. That's our legislated process. How it works in real life is that with individual designations, I attempt to reach out to the owners before it comes to council as much as possible, because it's a good idea to do that just from a community engagement. We can't always do that depending on who the owner is or the dynamics of the property. It's very much a property by property basis. When it comes to these more complex heritage resources, they have there's a greater demand for public consultation up front because there's a lot more stakeholders involved. So when we're looking at, for example, a heritage conservation district, we have to have a public meeting. And we are legislated to send out certain notices at certain times. So it really depends on what we're doing, how we're communicating with the public. It depends on the process that we're going through. The goal is to communicate with the public as much as possible in general, and how that looks varies based on the heritage resource that we're dealing with.
Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Emily, for your deputation today. A couple questions. How hard is it to get, because we sit around this room, there's 8 of us that make the decision on what goes heritage, right? How hard is it to get something de-heritized? That's a tough word. You and
I didn't see that one in my Funkin' Wagnalls.
Emily, you and I talked, and you mentioned value as we're going forward, because there's a lot of schools up that want to be designated heritage, but in 5 or 10 years from now, there might be a school that, when you say a value, that value of the property that a school is sitting on, if it's designated heritage, the next counselor or 3 counselors from now or group could say that property is really needed for this. So once something is heritage, designated heritage, how is it possible to get it off heritage?
That depends on the council of the day. So it's under the Heritage Act, it's actually fairly straightforward. So when a property owner would like to remove a heritage designation from their property, they make an application to the city. There's a number of things they have to provide, some background information. If I were to get one of those, I would bring it forward to the Heritage Committee, who makes a recommendation, and then it comes to council, and council can do whatever it wants. So if council wants to remove that to repeal the bylaw, to remove the heritage designation, you can absolutely do that. And if you don't, then you don't have to repeal the bylaw. It's completely up to council what you want to do. And that's it. That's pretty much the only thing that that has to happen. So it's really up to council when it receives a request to remove a heritage designation bylaw with the information that's provided. So we ask for things like, what they're planning on doing with the property, whether it's, what kind of use, if they're going to demolish it, that sort of information, so that council can make a good decision. But once council gets that information, you are free to remove or retain that bylaw as you see fit.
And that's in all circumstances, correct?
With individually designated properties. Heritage conservation districts can't be repealed yet. We're getting regulations from the province, but so we don't know what the process is that's going to be. So if someone wanted to repeal the Downtown Lindsay Heritage Conservation District, there is a regulation coming from the province, but we don't have it yet. So I actually don't know what that process is going to look like, because they're taking their time getting it to us. So.
Okay. And one more question. Do you only need one person? If just one person decides to send you a letter from the public to say that I think this should be heritage, you listen to one person and then you have to do all this work because one person has made a comment?
If we get a valid request, then we do some action on it. So for example, if someone reaches out to me and says, there's this property, I think it should be heritage designated, we will do a heritage evaluation on it to see if a designation is even warranted. When we get unsolicited requests from the public, which we don't very often, I do ask them to provide some additional rationale as to why they are doing that. If they're doing it to spite their neighbor, we're not going to bring that forward to council. If there's a legitimate concern regarding a demolition of a property, then that would be an appropriate time where a third-party request would be brought forward to council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If the gallery wishes to have a conversation, would they leave the council, please? Thank you. Councillor Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. First of all, Ms. Turner, I just want to say I appreciate all the vast detail you do when you do a heritage designation. I've learned a lot about our own history just going through that. On this presentation, we could go to slide 14 for me, please. I found there was a key word missing, but then you spoke to it on slide 8. So I was gratified to hear that. And that is the word indigenous. And indigenous consultation is more than going back 150 years, but 1,000 years ago, and how our land was being used and whatnot. In any of these acts and policy frameworks, is the indigenous piece embedded in there? And that may not be a fair question to ask right at this point. But.
Kind of. So under the provincial policy statement and the growth plan, there is direction that we consult Indigenous communities when we're undertaking various types of cultural heritage studies, mostly with regards to archaeology. In terms of identifying and protecting Indigenous cultural heritage resources, there's not a lot of direction. Under the Heritage Act, Indigenous communities are allowed to protect their own resources, which is very good. So for example, a band council can pass a designation bylaw, so if they want to protect something on their reserve, for example, that can happen. In terms of how we as non-Indigenous communities interact with Indigenous cultural heritage, there's not a lot of direction. So we have a lot of Indigenous cultural heritage resources in Kawartha Lakes. A lot of those are archaeological, but when I had spoke about associative landscapes, they also exist here as well. So if we are going to pursue protection on those, we need to do that in consultation with Indigenous communities. So it's a much more complex initiative than, preserving a farm, for example, but that doesn't make it less worthwhile.
Okay, great answer. Thank you. I would almost suggest we add a 6th bullet point then, that we pursue our own Indigenous consultation appropriately. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Yeo.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, to Emily. Emily, say we had our own Route 66, should we designated a specific drive for its heritage? Would that give us autonomy over the speed limit, much like a community safety zone?
I'm actually not sure about that. I think that's probably outside of the framework of how some of this heritage preservation items have been framed by the province. But I mean, I can look into it. It's just not something I definitely know. Speed limits are not my area, but I can certainly look into it and get back to you if that would be helpful.
Yeah, it would be. I'm thinking of Balsam Lake Drive and the stone walls around the old Mackenzie estate and stuff. It's just the heritage and the history of that is just outstanding. And so if that area became a designated area, I just wanted to know whether it would give us the ability to affect our own speed limits without meeting certain warrants for traffic and the like. So that'd be great if you could find something like that.
Thank you. Councillor Smeet.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, would it be safe to say, Emily, that if a building, let's say a school that came up earlier, was designated heritage versus not, that the individual who owns it, in that case a school board, if it was not designated, we really, what they choose to do with selling that building is up to them. It could be sold to a plethora of different examples, none of which we'd have any say in. A designation, in your opinion, could it not in fact give us leverage at a table should we have a building like that and we've designated it and a school board decides they're going to sell? Do we now enter into a conversation, have some leverage as a council that in an affordable housing crisis, for example, we might have some say at a table, whereas an undesignated building we wouldn't?
Yes and no. So heritage designation gives you some additional tools to guide how sites like that are used. So let's say one of the Lindsay schools closed and the school board disposes of it. You don't really have any control over who it's sold to. So they could sell it to a developer, or they could sell it to a community group, or whatever that might be. Where the heritage framework does come in and give council some extra tools is when you're looking at future use of that site. So the Heritage Act gives council a couple of tools to guide future development. One of those is to allow for the request of things like heritage impact assessments. You can also put architectural design guidelines in place, and I think possibly most importantly is you can refuse a demolition permit. So for example, if somebody comes forward with a proposal from a planning perspective, it fits within our policy framework, but council does not think that it's an appropriate use of that site, you can refuse the demolition permit on the heritage building for that particular proposal. And that's that. A heritage building cannot be demolished or redeveloped without council say so.
Councillor Ashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you too, Emily, and thanks for all your work as I'm on your committee, and you do excellent work and energy all the time, and great reports that you put together. We don't agree on everything 100%, but that's fine. That's the way it should be, and nobody's going to agree on everything 100%, but it brings out good discussion. Just a couple things you mentioned about, for example, in Lindsay there for the Heritage Conservation District, when we were going to, at one time, have a coordinated area that was going to be basically a blanketed conservation district. It was turned down, but in that case, and we've been asked, and you've been asked, and we've been asked as a committee as to why, for example, like we don't designate where basically the old mill is, and instead of going the whole, then paint a wide brush on everything, because that's where the most historical area is. Like, is there a process? Can you explain the process to start from something like that, that we get, you know, the heart of it designated, and then we could potentially branch out, but in this case we're not going to, but which is odd. And some people ask me, like, why hasn't this area been designated historical as of yet? But there is a process that we do, and just maybe if you don't mind explaining on that particular area.
Sure. So just looking at the old mill area, there were a lot of competing interests with regard to the HCD. And some significant concerns raised by the public, which is why that wasn't designated as a whole. With regard to the old mill itself, it's just one of those assets that we have that has never been designated. We have lots of them. Part of that is because we haven't had a dedicated heritage planning program for that long, particularly compared to other municipalities. And we just have a lot of resources, and it has fallen through the cracks. So there have been discussions about designating the old mill, and that's something that council can look at a future time, and staff will probably bring forward some recommendations about that in the next year or so. But that's a city-owned property, so we have some internal conversations before that can happen.
Okay, thanks. And if we do it, we're certainly going to be engaging Councillor Smeaton and McDonald and the rest of the council, like, before we do anything on that. The last thing you mentioned about the agricultural aspect, like the old bank barns, you see them, like, they're being demolished at a rapid pace right now, and if you're ever in Bobcaygeon, across from the new Kawartha Dairy, obviously the huge bank barn, the Boyd barn, that's a phenomenal structure that you won't see anywhere else in Ontario, and that proves that, you know, preserving those types of structures is really paramount if we want to preserve our agricultural heritage. But has there been any talk about you know, doing more preservation in older farm buildings, because they're rapidly being demolished?
There's been a limited amount of conversation about that. In the provincial context, there's been quite a bit of conversation about preserving old barns. I think a lot of people recognize that they're really important, but there are some challenges in terms of actually using them for modern agriculture for a whole variety of reasons. So one of the things that I think will probably end up coming out of the cultural heritage landscape strategy is a conversation about how we do that. So farms are one of our really important cultural heritage landscapes here. We really value our agricultural community, and we value the work they put in to build our various farmsteads that we have. And we need to figure out a way that works with our modern agricultural system, but also preserves that heritage. So there's a really big conversation that I think will likely come out of this strategy, but it's not a tomorrow thing, if you know what I mean. So it's not going to be solved, in the next week, but that conversation is on the back burner.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I have a motion that the presentation regarding Heritage Conservation District and Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategies be received, and that this recommendation be brought forward to Council for consideration at the next regular Council meeting? Councillor McDonald, Councillor Smeaton. All in favor? And that passes. Going with the presentation, of course, is a report, item 621. Did you wish to speak to it, Emily, in any way, shape, or form, or it speaks for itself? And We'll see if council has any questions.
It's effectively what's in the presentation, so I don't think there's too much to add on that.
Thank you. Can I have a motion that the report Heritage Conservation District and Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategies be received, that the Heritage Conservation District Strategy Appendix A and Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy Appendix B be endorsed, and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting? Councillor Yeo, Councillor Warren, any questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And that's passed. Item 6.3 has been deferred to a future meeting, so we'll move on to item 6.4, which is the tree preservation bylaw presentation by Robin Carlson.
Good afternoon. And do you have my slides with you? Thank you. So good afternoon. I am here today to talk about two proposed bylaws that I'm not asking council later this month to pass, but rather just to introduce at this time, to seek consultation from the public, our advisory committees, First Nations, and then bring a report back next year. Those of you who are interested in this topic may want to check out our Jump In site on the city's website, which is live regarding these two bylaws. So currently, the city does not in any way municipally restrict the cutting down of trees. There is some existing framework, but it's at the at the provincial level. So the Migratory Birds Act, the Conservation Authorities Act, and the Endangered Species Act all work together to restrict the destruction of trees, but also have their gaps in them where additional protection at the municipal level could close those gaps. And what we have seen locally is that our official plan, which guides how we develop within the city, is seeking to restore and protect shorelines. So there is a lot of policy language regarding the protection of shorelines. And similarly, the conservation authorities in this area have adopted lake management plans with the input of the city that seek to protect areas within shorelines for tree cover. And those plans illustrate that along shorelines, tree cover is important for the health of the lakes or the rivers, and that currently the city of Kawartha Lakes doesn't have sufficient tree cover. So based on those recommendations for shoreline protection, the first bylaw that we'll be looking at really focuses on protection of shoreline areas, environmental protection areas, and protection of trees or tree cover that would be lost through development. So if we move on to the next slide, please, we'll start to look at the first bylaw that's being introduced. It's attached at Appendix A to the report that follows this presentation. And it is the protection of trees on private property. And so again, it's requiring a permit on privately owned property if you're cutting down mature trees. So I'll just pause there to illustrate that it is for mature trees only and not for all trees. There is a definition of what a mature tree is in the bylaw, and it's nicely illustrated on the Jump In site. So a mature tree, if you measure up from the base or from the ground, 4.5 feet, and then you measure around the trunk, that's the circumference, and then you divide the circumference by 3.14, you'll get the diameter, which is, if you think of a circle, it's right through the circle. So we're looking for trees that are 5 inches or greater in diameter, so through the center. And so if you're going to cut down an immature tree on your property, you just go ahead and do that. If you're going to cut down a mature tree, you may need a permit. So the questions to ask yourself are you within 30 meters of a shoreline? Or are you on any property where your property itself is greater than 0.5 of a hectare in size? And if so, then yes, you would require a permit. Now, as I alluded to at the beginning, this is not a bylaw intending to impact existing businesses. So the general process of removing trees on a person's property as part of their activities. So more specifically, there are a lot of exemptions in this bylaw where you wouldn't require permits. So if you're one of these industries, such as an agricultural industry, you're farming, or you're a hobby farmer, you're a cemetery or a tree nursery, a Christmas tree farm, an orchard, you're an aggregate producer, a golf course, or you engage in forestry, then you would be exempted from needing a permit. There are some other exemptions. So for example, you want to install or repair septic within a shoreline, because this is considered to be that the improvement of your septic situation is important for the lake itself, that we don't want to discourage that. So that is an exemption. And similarly, residential heating using wood is considered environmentally friendly, according to the experts at KRCA. So I, on their recommendation, am recommending that an exemption be made for people who take down trees on their own property for use in residential heating. Similarly, when speaking last week with the Agricultural Development Advisory Committee, they brought up the issue of buckthorn as a very invasive species here. So in response to that, one exemption would be, is it an invasive species? If so, then you can cut it down without a permit. And finally, hazard trees. A lot of homeowners that have property on shorelines have indicated they might have trees that are, because they have a lot of trees on their property, they might have trees that grow up into their eaves, into power lines, and so those that would pose a hazard based on their location, or say they are damaged from a windstorm and they look like they're going to fall down on your house. Anything like that would be an exemption, so you wouldn't even require a permit. Next slide, please. So the payment that is being proposed would be dependent on whether or not what your situation is, if you're on a large property or a small property, and we'll get into that more in the next slide. But those payments can be offset by tree replacement. And so the idea here is that we're looking to specifically reduce the amount of trees that are removed during development, and therefore you can have an offset cost. The price was chosen because, using 2022 values, $425 is the value of a mature sapling. So that is what you would see planted in a subdivision along the boulevard. They're 6 feet or 8 feet, and they're a couple of years of growing, but they're in no way a mature tree yet. So the replacement costs would be trying to encourage you to, instead of paying the fee, to replace with a similar amount of mature saplings. There is a prohibition proposed for removal of healthy and mature trees in environmental protection areas. The current prohibition for environmental protection areas covers buildings. So you can't build a house in an environmental protection area, but your driveway could go through an environmental protection area. So this would conceivably allow you to still do that, but you would need to pay for the mature trees taken down for your driveway. So the development process itself would be impacted by this bylaw. Next slide, please. So if we're looking at an existing lot of record scenario, and currently there's no cost to remove and mature a healthy tree, in this case, you're putting in a building or a garage, or you just want to clear a driveway, for example, you up to the half-acre size of your lot, you're only going to be regulated if you're in a shoreline area or environmental protection area. And in that case, your fee is $425 for every mature, healthy tree that you're taking down. There's no application fee, but there is a fee for the tree removal. And then if for on any larger property, you're going to be paying $1,700 per mature, healthy tree that's taken down. And again, not in any of those exemptions. It's a hazard tree or it's an invasive species, for example. The cost, though, would be reduced. So if you're on a small property and you would have to pay $425 fee because you're taking down one tree, you could instead put in a mature sapling and therefore you pay nothing. Next slide, please. So in the case of lot creation, such as a subdivision scenario, or you're developing in a plan of condo, that will be on those larger properties. And again, there is that $1,700 per healthy tree removed with no application cost. Currently, our urban design guidelines require that for every lot created, one mature sapling is placed, and that will still exist. So this would be an additional payment on top of that. And we have had some success in negotiating agreements through our ministerial zoning order framework agreements that require payments for healthy mature trees. So it seems to be working well. In terms, next slide, please. In terms of the process considerations, the idea is not to add a second layer for development where there's an existing process that we can tie the tree permit into, so that for the public, it's more seamless. There will be cases where, for example, a building permit, we can't tie those processes together, and a building permit is something that needs to be issued in a short period of time. So in that case, the building permit is issued and you simply are given a heads up by the building department. There's this tree bylaw that you need to reach out to tree bylaw at kawarthalakes.ca and get a permit if you're removing any trees. Similar with Conservation Authority permits, the Conservation Authority permit would regulate any root disturbance within a regulated area, but it wouldn't necessarily protect, or it doesn't protect, tree cutting above the ground. And so therefore, in some cases, you might have concurrent permits. And so because that's an external agency, we would just have a two permit scenario. You may also have a case where there's no existing process, such as where there's no building permit that's required. So you don't need to rezone your land, you don't need to create a lot, you don't need a building permit, but you're just going to clear land for a bigger backyard. In that case, you would make an application for a tree permit through tree bylaw at kawarthalakes.ca. But for those existing city processes, like we're making an application for a site plan to the planning department, or we're severing our lot, we're trying to submit a draft plan approval for a subdivision, all of that would go through the planning department. and then the planning department would work on the back end with the tree permit to issue that in accordance with the tree bylaw. And the same thing with any pre-servicing agreement that would be administered by engineering. The reserve for the costs is already set up, the tree canopy reserve, and any payments where a person's decided they're just going to make the payment and they're not going to replant will go into the reserve, and the reserve will be flagged for a restoration in similar scenarios. So if you have a EP area that there was cutting in an EP area, environmental protection area, then in that case you would the money when taken in would be flagged for restoration in another environmentally protected area. Similarly, within shorelines, if there was removal without tree replacement and there were fees intaken in that case, then in that case that would go to shorelines. And then for the larger developments, that would be a more flexible use to reforest within the city. And Public Works has already made some good use of the funds in the reserve to date through a private or a development agreement, and that those funds are being used to plant hedgerows along roads, so that when the winter comes and the snow blows, then the trees and the hedges will collect the snow and hopefully protect drivers from those safety issues. Next slide, please. So the second bylaw, and of much less interest, I think, to the general public, and for that reason is not covered on the jump-in site, but is covered here very briefly with one slide and also in the report, is the regulation of cutting of trees by people in the public. So not the city, not city activities, but people from the public want to cut down city-owned trees. Why would people from the public want to cut down city-owned trees? Well, maybe there's a road allowance, but no road on it, and they want to build a road. So quantifying the cost of the tree removal. If they live across from a shoreline that's an unopened road allowance, and they want to cut on that shoreline, or perhaps there is a common area water space access block, and these are common in the city, where you have a rural subdivision and you have a lot of waterfront owners, but you also have some people who don't front on the water, and then you have these little squares of natural space. So a person might come to the city and say, I want to cut down a tree on city property. And currently, of course, as the property owner, the city can choose whether or not it agrees to that. This bylaw gives a little more structure as to when trees can be cut down and when they can't, and when they can be providing a fee for that. Next slide, please. So like I indicated at the beginning, the next steps for these bylaws is to commence consultation with our First Nations, to get additional input from our Agricultural Development Advisory Committee, to get input from our Environmental Advisory Committee, and to engage the public through jump-in, to return back to Council in 2024 to potentially pass these bylaws, or as may be amended as a result of things I learn and things I see from what the public and our partners are interested in. Next slide, please. So again, if there is any further review to be had, please do look at the report on this agenda, as well as our jump-in site. Any questions? That's the end of my topic.
Thank you. Councillor Warren.
Through you. Thank you, Robin. Yes, a couple things stood out. The 30 meters with no septic, or having a septic within the 30 meters. We should try to steer clear of that if possible. So I believe there should be some wording in there. Just that's something I saw. But also, what about woodlots? A lot of loggers come in and can clear cut. Many municipalities have tree bylaws to oversee woodlots. A question. So if I have, my home is on land that's less than 0.5 hectares, which is a fairly big lot, I can cut down whatever I want if I'm not close to a water body? That's my first question.
So if your property is 0.5 hectares or less, and you're not within 30 meters of a water body, and you don't have environmental protection on your property, then yes, you can cut down what you want. But of course, be mindful of those other pieces of legislation that are not city legislation that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation.
Thank you for that. Just wanted to make that very clear. And in your report, you had costing and whatever, and I'm thinking, with all the development going on, shouldn't there be funds available to run the program without extra, money coming from the taxpayer for a vehicle and a couple more staff?
My apologies. I will need you to restate the question, please.
So I'm wondering, with all the development, don't you think that the program could, with all the costs of, or the charging people for cutting down trees in developments, that there would be quite a bit of money in a reserve, that so the program would not have to go back to the taxpayer. It would be like in a reserve, so it would fund that program. Yes, thank you. Self-funding.
Yes, and that is a way to fund it. Another way to fund it, the way I have suggested, is that the taxpayer pays for the additional staff and vehicles, and that the money from a tree payment, or if it's a fine, so if there's a conviction and fines are placed into the city's hands, then in that case, in either of those cases, that the funds actually go to tree restoration. So they're not eaten up by the cost of the administration, that is borne by the taxpayer. And the reason why I think that that's a fair split is because we are asking people that have private property to make a payment to the corporation, to the general taxpayer, recognizing that the tree has value to the city as a whole. And so therefore I think cost sharing is fair.
Okay. So how will, we have a site preparation bylaw. How will a tree preservation bylaw work with a site preservation bylaw? Because right now, somebody can come in and just clear cut. And so how will those two bylaws work together?
So if somebody comes into planning for a site plan application, then planning would reach out to the city's arborist and ask them to take a look at the property and determine whether or not there is any tree payment that needs to occur for any trees that would be removed. So the individual would need to indicate in their plans what the existing cover is, what's mature, what is invasive, and then the city's arborist could determine, yes, as a result of the development, they are going to need to pay $3,000 into the reserve.
So my fear is, okay, the question is that, so you're planning on a rollout in 2024, but you don't have an arborist or an environmental planner and a vehicle. Is it possible, it's not in this the 2024 budget, is it possible to do, as we did with short-term rental, a soft rollout? Because I fear that this will be out there and then people will just clear cut. You know, they know that it's coming. So that's my fear with that. So the question is, could we do a soft rollout without, you know, a vehicle, an extra vehicle? I'm wondering if there is the possibility of bylaw being able to work with you to at least get the bylaw in place, and then have the other staff members and vehicle in 2025.
Because of the significant administrative work, the city really would need to consider alternative funding, such as funding from a reserve or in another way impacting the 2024 operational budget, because the city cannot do a soft rollout without significantly impacting staff resources.
So I noticed looking in the 2024 capital or operating budget that there isn't anybody being hired, extra people for bylaws. So I'm wondering, with the short-term rentals, I'm wondering if that wasn't an issue, then maybe we would be able to do that as a soft rollout, even for the last couple months of the year. Is that a possibility?
Well, I will not speak for the manager of municipal law enforcement or the director of community services, but if I imagine that they would both say that they just cannot take on additionally 2 extra positions worth of work at this time.
Councillor Smeaton.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, through you. Regarding the second bylaw, fantastic news, long overdue. I just wanted to read something and then I have a quick question. So on January 28th, 2021, tree preservation was received by council. At that time, so this is 2 years ago, at that time council passed a motion that directed staff to commence a formal public consultation strategy and education plan and deliver an options update report to council within 6 months. So this is 2 years later, so it's good news. And I'm just wondering if it's possible, July was mentioned, is it possible at the end of Q1, like to put, I know today we don't make decisions, is it possible for next council meeting to at least have an update at the end of the first quarter of 2024 on how jump-in's going, how all the different initiatives towards the July 24th deadline are coming along?
You can make that motion at council. Deputy Mayor Richardson.
Thank you, and through you, and that's kind of the premise that I was going through as well, is that we are in that realm of collecting, you know, more information, because it is very comprehensive. Like, you have those challenges, right? How do you enforce without mapping trees or having witnesses, right? Or exceptions to the bylaw? It can be very, very complex. I'm also wondering if this is a natural first step for us to, you know, look towards an urban forest plan, which is when it comes to those developments and making sure that we're restoring those critical parts back into the environment when we are building subdivisions as we move out to our rural areas. So there's a lot of moving mechanisms when it comes to this. And just maybe one comment regarding Councillor Warren's about, you know, loggers. Loggers do have to follow best practice when it comes to woodlot management. And they do, you know, their premise is to restore the understory, so you actually have reforestation. But as Councillor Smeaton did say, I think it's critical, as you said, that we are doing the jump in and getting that information, because you know, logistically, we are huge, and how are we going to manage this? So I think it's a great report today because I can see a lot of steps that we have taken in the last couple of years, so thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a motion that the presentation regarding a tree preservation bylaw be received and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting? Deputy Mayor Richardson, Councillor Warren, all in favor? And that's passed. So we have a report, tree preservation bylaw that goes with this. Were there any questions, or does somebody want to move the recommendation as printed with the understanding that this is to go for consultation and to come back to council? Who did? Okay. Emma, were you making that motion, or did you move by Councillor Yeo, seconded Councillor McDonald? All in favor? And that's passed. Moving into reports, we're going to jump past 7.1 because Councillor Perry had to leave for a short period of time and he wishes to speak to that. So we will come back to it. Do we need to take 5 minutes? Okay, let's take 5 minutes. Okay, moving on to item 7.2. We're going to have the Emily Turner show back. And are you doing it from there?
Yeah, I think I'll just do it from here if that's all right.
Yep, fine by me. So, item 7.2, Indigenous Reconciliation Initiatives. Emily, do you want to say anything about this report?
I'll just give a really quick overview. This is a report that Committee of the Whole had originally seen in June, and we had deferred it to a later meeting today for some additional work on this topic. So there's just a couple of items to highlight in this report. This is just a general overview of some of the items that staff have been working towards in terms of advancing reconciliation with Indigenous communities. And I think it's important that this is a start, but we wanted to highlight to Council that this work is going on behind the scenes and will be continuing. The other recommendation out of this is extending the training to the Municipal Heritage Committee. So when we originally wrote the education policy, we had included staff, council, and two committees of council, so planning, advisory committee, and committee of adjustment, because they do deal with land-based matters that may have specific Indigenous connections. The Municipal Heritage Committee actually deals with those kinds of files as well. So staff felt that it was appropriate to extend that education piece to that committee at this time.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Warren.
Through you, this is for Councillor Perry. Just a heads up, just some of the language that the Peterborough Métis and District Wapiti Métis Council be advanced to the William Treaties First Nations, that Appendix B be advanced to the Williams Treaty First Nation. Yeah, and just, I guess for you, Emily, it's just a heads up that he would like to see some change, and I guess he can talk to you about that. Okay.
If there's things Councillor Perry would like to see circulated to various Indigenous groups, we can certainly do that. I mean, we do that regularly, so it's that's easy to do.
And I guess it's just the language too, right? So it's the Peterborough and District Wapiti Métis Council. Okay, thank you.
I have a motion as printed. Councillor Warren, Deputy Mayor Richardson, all in favor? And that's passed. We go to 7.3, which is proposed heritage designation, 1473 Highway 7A, Geographic Township of Manvers, Bethany General Store. Emily?
This is a designation coming out of our Bill 23 work that you're seeing regularly. So this is the Bethany General Store. Its heritage value, very, very briefly, is as a very rare example of a false facade general store. There aren't very many of these in Kawartha Lakes. So it has a substantial amount of architectural value, and it's an important downtown feature in Bethany.
Thank you. Any questions? Deputy Mayor Richardson?
Oops, sorry, no questions, but I will move as printed.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Joyce. All in favor? And that passes. Item 7.4 is a proposed heritage designation of 1475 Highway 7A, Geographic Township of Manvers, Bethany Bank of Toronto. Emily?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. This is the former Bank of Toronto, or TD, recently in Bethany, which the bank is closed. It's now a retail operation. It has cultural heritage value as a really good example of a 1920s bank, and also in the work of architect W.R.L. Blackwell, who is from Peterborough but did a lot of work in this area. And it's one of his few surviving bank buildings, along with the next one on the agenda, so it has quite a bit of value from that architect's standpoint.
Thank you. You going to move that as printed? Deputy Mayor Richardson, seconder, Councillor McDonald. All in favor? And that's passed. Item 7.5, proposed heritage designation of 1 King Street East, Village of Omemee Bank of Toronto.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. This is a very similar property to the last one. It does look different, but it has similar value as a 1920s bank, and also as the work of architect W.R.L. Blackwell.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore, you wish to move that?
I'll move it to receive for now. I just wanted to speak to it, if I could.
Go ahead.
So thanks, through you to Council. We've been talking to the owner of the building, but just going back, I'll have a question through you to Emily there. At first, a couple of years ago, when we looked at this building, the goal was to look at the facade, the front of it, and preserve the facade. So that was the original intention. I remember quite a few years ago, not a few years ago, 3 years ago, I guess it was. But now the owner has expressed a desire not for it to be designated at this time, but I just would like to maybe receive it, and then we'll be in consultation with the owner in the next week or so, you know, just to sort of we can all get together and, you know, on the phone and sort of discuss like the ramifications, because it is a big step, and he has some, he's done a lot of work to it, and it looks great. But I mean, if someone's against it, you know, we've got to work with these owners, and I'd just like to have the opportunity to speak to the owner first.
Well, I think what we're doing here is we're starting the process, and the next step is to go and speak to the owner. So I think moving this doesn't hurt it at all. You know, the opportunity will be there to talk to the owner. Nothing is being designated as a result of these actions.
So next council meeting, it won't be designated?
No.
I don't think that's 100% right, because we
well,
just
what it
designated
says is you're receiving it, and that the Municipal Heritage Committee's recommendation to designate 1 King Street East under Part 4 of the Heritage Act as being of cultural heritage value or interest be endorsed. So council's asking it to endorse that the Heritage Committee is right, and that staff be authorized to proceed with the process to designate the subject properties. So they're being asked for permission to go forward. They're not being asked permission to designate it.
Okay, so the next council meeting will just be to start the process. It won't be fully designated. Okay, that's fine. Because we need to, you know, if an owner, and this happens periodically, that an owner may not be in agreement of their property. You know, they invest a lot of money and time into it.
All of these are only for the process to go forward.
That's fine.
Okay?
Yeah.
So you're moving that as printed?
I'll move it, yeah, as printed.
Seconder, Deputy Mayor Richardson. All in favor? And that's passed. The next item is 7.6, which is proposed heritage designation of 35 Bolton Street, Village of Bobcaygeon, Bank of British North America.
This is our third bank on the agenda. It's quite a bit different from the other ones. It's an earlier one constructed in 1913. In Bobcaygeon, it's that corner anchor building on Bolton Street near the canal. It has a substantial amount of value architecturally, but also in relation to the contractor who did this, who is Peter Grant, who's one of the very significant contractors in turn of the century Bobcaygeon. There's a lot of grant work there, and most of it has not been recognized from a heritage perspective.
Thank you. You wish to do this, Councillor Warren?
I wish to speak to it through you.
Go ahead.
I reached out to Emily earlier, and I've got a recommendation to change the recommendation, if that's okay. Yeah, so that it be
do it at council.
I guess I could, but I could do it also here. Just that it be received and defer the decision until staff have had a chance to reach out to the owners, and that this recommendation come forward to the next council meeting.
But that's what we're doing with all of these. It's giving them permission to go to the next step, which is consultation. Is that not correct, Emily?
It is. There's a little bit of background information on this property, just to give council some context in terms of Councillor Warren's conversation with me. So as I mentioned in my presentation earlier, when we do designations, yes, with the formal notice happens after council makes their motion for staff to initiate that process. But I reach out to property owners ahead of time. It's a courtesy call. With the owner of this particular property, that initial outreach had been made, but an additional meeting was supposed to occur before it came to council. And because of a number of external circumstances, that hasn't happened yet. It's been sort of kicked down the road a little bit. So Councillor Warren had discussed with me the potential just to put this one on ice until that meeting can happen, because there's some ongoing outreach with the property owner that's not quite resolved yet.
Thank you. So you would like to defer this until sometime in the future?
For you, so to defer it until staff have had a chance to reach out to the owners.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Ashmore. All in favor? That passes.
It's not a big deal. Giving me a hard time all the time.
Item 7.7, proposed heritage designation of 130, 132 William Street North, Town of Lindsay, Carew Lumber Company office. Is that Ward 5? You good with that?
I'd like to move as printed, please.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor McDonald. Did you want to speak to it, Em?
Just sort of the quick Coles notes as usual. This is a former lumber company office. Actually, it speaks to that sort of wider lumber company landscape that I talked about a little bit earlier today. It's a really unique architectural example in Kawartha Lakes, and it has some substantial value in terms of Lindsay's history of lumbering throughout, the 19th and 20th century.
Is that lumbering or lumbering?
Maybe both.
We have a mover and seconder. All in favor? And that passes. Councillor Ashmore, did you want to say something about it?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I'm not sure if it's appropriate to go back. No, Councillor Warren had done exactly what I was going to ask, to have that deferred, and that's why I agree with it. And I was wondering if the 048 one, the one for 1 King Street East in Omimi, could be deferred, similar to what we just did?
Well, there's going to be a discussion on it. It's coming back to council at some later date, and no, we've already passed it, so we can't really do that. I didn't know what Councillor Warren was going to do, and I didn't know that there had been a discussion with Ms. Turner, and therefore, and I still think we could have passed it as printed, and those discussions could have taken place. So unfortunately, no, I can't.
Just a question, could it be extracted at council?
Of course.
Okay, we'll do that. Thanks.
Item 7.8, amendment to the Heritage Delegated Authority Bylaw 2019.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So this is an amendment to our delegated authority bylaw with regard to heritage permitting. So for a little bit of background on this, we delegate most authority for heritage approvals to staff. The reason for this is that most of the applications we receive are fairly minor in nature, and if they're not delegated to staff, they have to come to council, which is a significant waste of everybody's time and not great for service efficiency. At the moment, for our individually designated properties, the delegated authority bylaw states that the Municipal Heritage Committee has to review them before they are approved. So that's anything that's designated individually. What this proposed amendment is doing is it is taking signage out of the equation. So the number one most common application that we get is for commercial signage. It moves very quickly as new businesses move into spaces. Mostly it's been with regard to our downtown Lindsay Heritage Conservation District, and a lot of those are approved very quickly. I can approve those in a couple of days. Most of them come in and they're in and out of my desk really fast, which is good for our businesses, and everybody's happy. As we are approving individual designations for more commercial properties, including the ones we've looked at tonight or this afternoon, it's still 4 o'clock, and also the ones in Fenland Falls we looked at a little bit earlier this fall, we will be likely getting more and more signage applications for individually designated properties. The rationale for this is so that the Heritage Committee does not have to review signage applications. They will be reviewed and approved by staff if there are major issues with them or if they require amendments to other pieces of policy or bylaws. So for example, Council in September received a heritage-related application to amend our sign bylaw. That still comes forward to Council. It's just working to get those everyday signage applications in and out of the door as quickly as possible so we provide good services for our businesses.
Thank you. Councillor Smeaton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I just had 3 quick things to get me ready for the council meeting when this comes back. In it, it says at present, the authority for the vast majority of alterations are delegated to staff, Emily, and that's what you said. So it's in and out, it's happening. This is a speed thing. And later it says applications coming before council are very rare, which is what you also articulated. So if they do come before council, it's because they're rare. And there must be a reason why they didn't just do the in and out, or they wouldn't come to council at all. So I wondered if you could explain that a little bit further.
For sure, yes. So there's a number of circumstances where an alteration application received for a heritage property would come forward to council. The first one is that if staff refuse it. So if I were to refuse a permit for something, the applicant has the ability to bring that forward to council so that council can make a decision on it.
Right.
The next would be if it's associated with a major planning application. So if we have a significant redevelopment happening of a heritage property, and it's a really big deal, effectively, those are generally brought forward to council so that council can approve those. Those would be for larger projects. We don't get those very often.
That's good.
But
we do get them, and therefore they come to council when they happen because. So
exactly.
The other thing, I just want to make sure I read it right, that this would take away a committee level piece, right? So this would, which have public on it. So this would, not that it's a big deal, I'm just making sure my ducks are in a row. This would take away some public consultation at the committee level. Is that true?
That's right. So how it would work, how stuff works that goes to the committee at the moment is it comes into myself. I have a look at it to make sure it, adheres to stuff. If there's some big red flags, I deal with the owner before it goes to the Municipal Heritage Committee. I then write a report for the Municipal Heritage Committee. They review it. They provide some recommendations, whether that's some alterations they want to see or whether it's just to approve it. It then comes back to me. I can either take those recommendations from the Heritage Committee or not. They are only an advisory body. So they can't approve or deny things. And this would remove that step of coming to the Heritage Committee. The main reason for doing that is because they only meet once a month. So if you have somebody who submits a heritage permit application the day after they meet, they're waiting 30 days for their application to be approved, which is an awfully long time, particularly when it comes to signage.
My only last question was for the CAO, if I might, just quickly, is there any chance a new director of planning might have a different perspective on this? We have a new director of planning coming in the new year. No reason why they would. This is just as obvious as it seems. Yeah, okay.
Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, through you, thank you. Emily, does the BIA right now, does it go to the BIA for the get to approve signage right now?
No, so the BIA doesn't review signage that comes in for heritage permits. What we do have from the BIA is we have a schedule to our sign bylaw, and there are a number of regulations in that pertain specifically to the Lindsay BIA area.
I have a mover and seconder that bylaw 2019-154 be amended to update the policies in relation to signage as outlined in Appendix A of this report, that the necessary pending bylaws be brought forward for adoption, and that this recommendation be brought forward to Council for consideration at the next regular Council meeting. Councillor Ashmore, seconder, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? And that's passed. 7.9, Emily, I think it's your last one. Ontario Heritage Act notices.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this is it for me for today. So this is following up on the presentation from earlier regarding the closure of Kawartha Lakes this week. So under the Ontario Heritage Act, we have to publish public notices in a newspaper. So when we designate a property, when we initiate a heritage conservation district study, there's a number of other items where we have to publish public notices. They have to be in a newspaper or in an alternative method as determined by a council policy. So one of the nice things about the Heritage Act is that it has a provision if you don't have a newspaper, which is that council has to pass a policy outlining what that alternate way of presenting public notices would be. So in response to the fact that we don't have a newspaper anymore, a policy has been drafted to discuss how we're going to do notices. So as was discussed in the presentation, those notices will move online. They'll go to the public notice section of our website, and those will be our statutory public notices that we're required to provide under the Act. In extension of that, we will also be putting the word out in other sources so that people can go to the website. Not everybody is constantly checking the website, so we'll be pushing those out on our social media, putting things up in our libraries. For some things like heritage conservation districts, we'll probably do print notices in things like the Lindsay Advocate or other publications. We'll have to see what works best in terms of reaching the most number of people, but that's where we are with public notices. The policy also includes a second section with regard to direct notices. So with the vast majority of heritage items, that would be including permitting, designation, heritage conservation districts, or general policy initiatives that impact specific property owners, we send direct mail. There's a lot of legislation around how we do that and who it gets sent to. That doesn't change, but it has been placed in the policy just so it's transparent in terms of how we do that. The one thing that we have flagged in the policy that's just important for council to note is that we have noted that notice will be served either by email or by mail. And that's reflective of our current practices. So for a lot of things, we send things in the mail. So designation notices, they generally go via Canada Post, whereas when we're looking at heritage permit applications, those notices are generally served by email because we have that from the owner, and it's a little bit faster, and most people prefer that. So the policy just outlines that we'll do one or the other, but stays really within how our current practice is.
Thank you. I have any questions? No? Mover and seconder? Deputy Mayor Richardson, Councillor Ashmore, all in favor? And that's passed. Item 710 is the Roundup Program Update and Expansion. Do we have anybody online who wants to speak to this? Oh, oh, I'm sorry. Director Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Council. This is a pretty straightforward report. We run 4 recycle roundup days around the community where people can bring their household hazardous waste and other provisions. Since 2021, we haven't accepted electronics. Last year, there was a lot of interest, or this past year when we ran the program, there's a lot of interest in having that program reinstated so people can drop electronics off during those roundup days. So this is effectively asking Council to provide direction to reinstate the electronics as part of those recycle roundup days. It's an $1,800 cost, $1,850 I think was the estimate. It's already worked into the budget, so it's a pretty straightforward report.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Richardson.
Thank you. I will move this as printed, and I do want to provide a comment regarding, I spent a few hours at the Members Depot that day, and that was the #1 question. It was about electronics instead of textiles, so I'm glad to see us expanding, and like you said, it's not a huge cost, so thank you.
Seconder, Councillor Warren. All in favor? And that's passed. Item 711 is, it's a good name for a store, you know. Request for electronic speed sign program. Mr. Kelly is not with us. Oh, He came back. I'm sorry. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, it's time for the Joe Show. So I've been directed by council to bring something to you regarding our electronic speed signs. Those are the signs that flash the speed people drive or people are going when they drive by it. It works by radar. It both is considered a traffic calming method, but it's also considered an alternative traffic calming method for roads that fail our traffic calming warrant process. It's kind of a neat thing where it could be either or. So in general, speed boards can be installed through our current traffic calming request process, or if council chooses to create a less stringent standalone program for the signs. Currently, with current budget, allows for 2 to 4 of these signs to be installed per year, and this is competing with our traveling speed board, which goes around temporary sites. So that's our current funding levels for the speed board. So basically, whether council chooses to bolster the current program by adding more opportunities to install these speed boards, or create a new program for permanent speed board locations, there will be some funding considerations, whether it's in-house or contracted out. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smeaton.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd move as printed, and as Joe knows, as Supervisor Kelly, I'm very excited for this discussion at the end of the month. He's going to, we talk a lot about speed boards, so this is great.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Richardson.
Thank you. Just maybe a couple of quick questions, if I can ask on this report. We have a thing of 6,000 to 10,000 based on installation. Is there any way? Is that based in-house or contract, Joe?
I was an educated guess on contracting it out. I wasn't able to get in-house costs in time for publishing.
Well,
so it would need to be dialed in at what the actual cost would be to contract it out.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you. Another one is, how do we move forward? Because I think every councillor sitting around this table would love to have permanent speed boards in their communities. So, I mean, if we're realistically looking at 4 per year, how do we go through that criteria of which area would meet those needs first?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we could develop, or we have developed, screening processes and a hierarchy of where we should prioritize location based on collisions, volumes, road design. We could continue to use that or develop one specifically for the speed boards.
Thank you. Maybe just one quick question. I know when Councillor Yeo and I brought this memo to council, we were talking about community groups wanting to buy in the procurement to help their communities. Is there any direction from you as this is a barrier?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Richardson. I looked into the bulk costs of purchasing bulk signage. The savings aren't really significant. And as for developing a program to sell to communities, I recommend that we continue using our own strategies and warrant processes for determining where these signs go. Otherwise, communities could just purchase signs and put them on roads that would condition drivers to start ignoring them. If it's clear in the surrounding environment that these signs serve no purpose, then people could start ignoring them. So I recommend that we keep the decisions of where they go and where we spend our money on buying these signs in-house. Thanks.
You going to second that, or? Councillor McDonald did. Okay. Councillor Ashmore, you got a question?
Yes, through you to Joseph. Yes, this is an excellent program. We've talked about this. We brought it up at CPAC, Deputy Mayor Richardson, Councillor Warren. We talked about this. We do have like what they're called black hats, but they're very sort of inconspicuous small black boxes that are placed on areas that you can't see them. That's for a purpose, and they collect data. But these signs here are what people are really asking for. They want to see the visual flashing, and I see them on Durham Road 13, just past Little Britain there. There's a few there. And Durham Region uses these. I think these are good. My question is, how easily can these be moved around? I think they're fairly mobile, but then you mentioned you have to have a bucket truck to do it properly. You just can't put them on with a ladder because they are heavy and they have to be done coordinated with the bucket truck. Can they be rotated around and
yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have our current traveling speed board gets rotated around. For those, it takes less time because we usually just affix them to a tree or a utility pole. However, we still need qualified bucket truck operators to get the sign high up, so it gets the data we need and flashes the cars from a distance that is effective. So the 2 to 4 locations includes getting the traveling ones up as well. I have looked into getting smaller ones that less specialized staff and equipment can install. They're not quite there yet for size. I'm still waiting for one that gets small enough that I could just go out in a car and put it up on a pole.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a mover and seconder. Oh, Councillor Yule.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. And to Mr. Kelly. Part of the request was looking into cottage groups and stuff who have a private road and they want to purchase a sign, and the thought was maybe we could do it through a program in the city. Obviously, from your report, the cost savings are not enough to really warrant that. So with I guess my question, can a private group, a private cottage association, can they go out and just buy one of these, or are these a regulated item that is specific to municipalities?
Thank you, Councillor Yo. Through you, Mr. Mayor. It's not a regulatory sign. It's a warning sign. It's considered a warning sign. For private usage, if it's not on a city road allowance on a private road, there are avenues where they would be able to purchase it from a distributor.
Okay, and I thank you for that, because that's where probably half the interest I got from some sort of program was from private roads and something like Indian Point and Cobacomp where they're concerned about speed a lot. And so I do thank you for that, and I can at least tell them that they can purchase themselves with private road and they can put it up. And to me, the signs I've seen, I travel east quite a bit to Prince Edward Island, and every town on that island has the little flashing signs in both entrances coming in on the main highway. And they work, I don't know whether the RCMP down there has got people trained. But when that light flashes, you see the brake lights fly on all the time. So do you think we'll ever get to that point where all our hamlets and villages in the city, because we're so big, and it might sound like every hamlet and village, but it might sound like a lot of signs, but we always harp on how many roads we have and how big we are. So can you foresee our villages and hamlets getting these at the entrance points, or is that just too much of an ask at this point?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. It's important to not over-rely on these signs where they become just pollution to drivers and they just ignore them in general. But I do see a future where key hamlets on major roads could definitely use permanent signs. It is a goal that we calm traffic in the city, especially on major roads that have residential uses on it, and this is one way that we could do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a mover and seconder. All in favor? And that passes. Item 712, request for right turn lane on Pigeon Lake Road for Old Surrey Lane and speed sign placement review. You're up again, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I've been asked, directed by council to look into right-hand turning lane for Old Surrey Lane, which is the community known as Victoria Place, and also to look at the speed placement, the speed zone there. So just for your knowledge, a turning lane consists of two things. It's a taper that separates the turning traffic from the through traffic to get them off the same path. And then there's also what's called an auxiliary lane, which is basically storage for cars that are waiting to turn if the turning volumes are high enough. We performed a turning movement count study at this intersection, and we are recommending that we construct tapers at this intersection at the time when it is next up for resurfacing. As for the look into the speed zone placement, this was placed in 2021 due to the collision frequency on the two large curves between the two entrances of Victoria Place. Since then, the collisions have drastically gone down, so it looks like it worked. Using the Transportation Association of Canada's guidelines to determine where that speed limit should start and end, it's not recommended that we move it further back for risk of it. Again, this is a common theme of we don't want to risk it being ignored by the time they get to the turn where it has been effective in reducing collisions. We also don't want to give people coming out of Victoria Place a false sense of security, thinking that cars are going to be 60 as they drive out, because even if the speed limit is 60, they will not be traveling 60 when they exit. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore, you want to move that?
Yeah, I'll move that, please, and I wanted to thank Mr. Joe for his work on that, and the people, obviously, we brought this to council. I brought this to council with a petition, and this is a textbook case of how doing these preventative safety measures like the 60-kilometer zone, and we actually brought it back further on the south entrance. There are two entrances to Victoria Place. Victoria Place is 215 homes, and there's the north entrance and the south entrance. We're talking here about the taper. So it met the warrants for the 60-kilometer zone to be moved back, and it's also met the warrant for the taper. Now, the only thing I'd like to propose is that that this be received and then brought as a decision unit just for that taper, because right now it's not going to be constructed. It could be years. So it's not, from what we discussed, it's not like on the books to be constructed this year or next year, but it needs to be done. It meets the warrants, and we have a responsibility to get this done, and we've done it all by the book here, and I think it should move forward. This is not going to be a very expensive project, but just wondering if we can move it, receive it, and then forward it to a decision unit for budget. We need it now, because we want to have it built now, because we're going to get that highway is going to be rebuilt within, I don't know, it could be 3, 4, 5 years, but they need that right now. So the issue is, and I'll give you an example. Just south of that, the community of Lakeview Estates had one built, a taper, and it works great, and it's prevented a lot of accidents. So.
You have a comment, Mr. Kelly?
I believe the taper you're referring to was going into off of Kings Wharf Lane. I thought that was part of the reconstruction, resurfacing. Was it an addition to that? Maybe Supervisor Mike Farquhar will be able to comment.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. The taper was part of a development, and that requirement that came in after we had resurfaced Pigeon Lake Road from Kings Wharf Road going west.
So what would you expect if this is approved? When would the taper take place?
through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So we would implement that taper in the next eventual phase of resurfacing Pigeon Lake Road. So we've progressed right now on Pigeon Lake Road from basically Colony Road moving west towards Lindsay. The next section, it may be addressed in the next 5 year. I can't say at this point, but eventually that next phase of 17 would move from Colony going north. And at the time we resurface past Victoria Place, we would then, as part of that project, implement a turning lane.
Could you put a turning lane in right now?
So our current draft budget doesn't include for that.
I understand that, but is it physically possible to do?
Through you, if council wishes for a turning lane to be implemented, it can be implemented. It would be basically cut into the existing lane and paved out and built out based on the taper required. And
what's the approximate cost?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have to bring that back to council.
Ballpark? Okay, so you want it as a decision unit?
Yes, please.
Would have been nice to know. So the motion is as printed and to go to a decision unit for the 2024 budget. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, Councillor Warren had something to say. I'd be glad to listen to it. I mean,
We're dealing with your motion right now.
yeah, I would rather
Okay,
have it.
so we need a seconder for your motion. Are you seconding the motion? Okay, thank you. And you have a comment?
Through you. So I'd rather see that portion of 17 moved up into reconstruction and repaving. I thought that it was in the 5-year plan. So, because you've been doing segments, and I thought, okay, the next one will be closer and going up to 36. But if you're saying it's not even in the 5-year horizon, then I would support that, but I thought it would be sooner than that. So it would make sense to do it when you're reconstructing the whole road. So
But
my
you're
question-
seconding this motion.
I am, but my question is to Mr. Farquhar.
Well, I think that's an argument for another day, and we can talk about moving up that section of the road into the 5-year plan at another time. Right now, we're dealing with this being a decision unit in the 2024 budget, being referred. And you've seconded it. Is there more discussion? You can talk to Mike offline if you want. All in favor? That passes. Last 713, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I've been directed by council to speak to a petition regarding the automated speed enforcement request on Long Beach Road. Just a summary and a reminder that automated speed enforcement reports and presentations have been given mostly to the previous council, I believe one to the current council. The last direction we received on the matter was to report back on it when we have had time to study the effectiveness of the 40 speed areas that was completed this year. The report back on automated speed enforcement in general will be 2024. Regardless, automated speed enforcement is a form of traffic calming, so I could apply our traffic calming processes to Long Beach Road. In doing so, we found that the 85 percentile speeds on Long Beach Road is about 43 kilometers per hour. The 85 percentile speeds is the speed at which 85% of vehicles are driving at or below. In traffic engineering, it's generally considered to be the operating speeds of the road. So it does not meet the warrant for traffic calming. However, for roads that fail the traffic calming warrant, we can consider alternative measures due to its continuing an arterial road from Cameron, and due to the vulnerable users, which are pedestrians crossing to enjoy the waterfront, I think alternative measures should be considered for sure. So one suggested alternative measure would be to establish a community safety zone. This is zones where, under the Highway Traffic Act, speed fines are doubled. They have various reported levels of effectiveness, depending all on the type of enforcement that supports it. Basically, to discourage through traffic, we've already made the Long Beach Road arterial portions from Cameron to the waterfront a 60. There's no longer any 80 speed zones from Cameron to Road 121. In addition to this, to further discourage through traffic, community safety zones could help, especially if we do periods of zero tolerance enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and I want to thank the supervisor for the work on this. It's always a pleasure to work with the supervisor. Great information is always provided, and I want to commend him on that for our work on this and other files. This has been an issue, Long Beach Road, since the campaign, and I've been working with local residents on Long Beach for a solution such as this, and this specifically. If you've ever driven along Long Beach Road, it's a runway, a paved strip, and the enticement, as Supervisor Kelly just mentioned, there's a necessitation to cross that. It's almost as though the road goes through people's front yards because the beach and the dock and the water are on the front, are on the other side. So given all that, I don't want to overspeak the issue. I would just like to move it as printed.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Warren. Anybody? No? All in favor? And that's passed. Let's go back to item 7.1, which is the Hickory Beach dock licensing. Councillor, let's see, is Ms. Carlson on the line? Or is, oh, who is it? Oh, it's Sherry. Did you wish to speak to this, Sherry?
I can give you guys an outline, definitely.
I think we probably have a good understanding of the information after this period of time, but is there anything new and exciting?
Well, there's nothing new. I was just going to report that it had come to council before, and I was just going to say that staff specifically are of the opinion that Dock 27 should be removed before a further 2-year term is offered to the Hickory Beach Dock Owners Association.
Thank you.
If anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much again, Mayor. And as ward councillor for Hickory Beach, I've been involved with this, as has the mayor, as have some other councillors and staff over before my time as councillor, let's put it that way. I want to commend the Hickory Beach Docking Association for the work that they've been doing on this particular issue. This didn't come up during the campaign at all, nor did it come up in the fall. It really was raised for the first time when it appeared on the agenda back in the spring. Was the first that I, as ward councillor, has really heard of the issue and then was involved ever since. I know that all the parties have spoken with the former council. I've spoken with the president of the Docking Association, both parties, including Ms. Barboza. I've been on site. We've spoken to Realty Services about this one. There have been meetings here at council with the mayor, 2 deputations. So I don't think anyone can say that they haven't been heard on this issue. My understanding also from talking to the parties is that the placement of the docks was fine for the first year and change, and then something changed and it became the issue that it is today. We've heard a lot of use of the word encroachment. And I just want to clarify something, that when the word encroachment is being used in this situation, it's being used in its everyday use, not as we would normally think of it as councillors. There is no encroachment per se because it's all city land. It's all being leased. So when you hear the term encroachment, what they're really talking about is the spacing. Nothing is, I want to make clear to councillors, nothing is encroaching from private land or docks onto municipal land. That has all been regulated and is all municipal land through the lease and the agreement with the association. We have associations for a reason, and they're to handle disputes between those dock owners and the spacing of their dock. This is a long-standing tenant dispute. And I just wanted to clear up something in terms of maybe a false impression that was given last time at council. If you recall, we decided to extend the lease for 2 years, and there seemed to be an impression that there were ongoing issues with Hickory Beach and the docks. Just to maybe clarify the record and why I think that's a false impression, I only know of one, and that's this one. Out of 50-some docks that are being administered, there have been a couple of incidents in the past, which I've understood from the president of the association, but those have been handled accordingly. We're really talking about one dispute here. And, everyone might not like the result that I'm going to propose, but at least we'll get some clarity and people will hopefully be able to move on and pass this and find at least some value in that for future planning and enjoyment of the premises. So for all of these reasons, I'm going to move that this report indeed go forward. However, without Dock 27 being removed, and that the lease be extended to 2028, which is the 5 years originally requested and was the term of the last lease, especially given there don't seem to be any systemic problems within the association. There are different ways to mediate this, as we were told about on several occasions, and I would put it back there, not have the city descend into the arena here, so to speak, to provide a fix, that basically it not be removed and that the status quo prevail of a 5-year lease agreement. Thank you.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Smeaton. Anybody wish to speak to it? I agree with you that Dock 27 should not be removed, because Dock 27, there are two properties associated with the two docks that the owner of that property has two properties and should have a dock for each property. So I don't see the rationale for removing it. I also think that it's not clear. One party says that it wasn't there, and one party says it was there after 2015. So there seems to be controversy there, and I do like the 2-year period to go forward, but I'm not hung up on it. I have no issue. I think that council has been drawn into basically a neighbor dispute. Unfortunately, it coincided with the end of the lease agreement. So let's have at it, and all in favor. And that's passed. Motion that it will go forward, that the report, Hickory Beach Dock licensing be received, that the agreement between the City of Kawartha Lakes and the Hickory Beach Dock Owners Association be renewed for a 5-year period from expiry. So you're actually saying from 2023 to 2028?
Correct, Mayor. That would be the 5-year period.
Okay, thank you. And that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. All in favor? Okay, we're good to go. We'll go back We'll go back to memorandums, and the first memorandum is Councillor Perry regarding the interim restoration of snow plowing on Lakeview Park Road. If you wish to speak to it.
Just very briefly, Mayor, I think the memo hopefully speaks largely for itself. This Lakeview Road near Long Beach Road in Ward 3, there was a dispute or an altercation, an unfortunate altercation between, that's my understanding, between a plow driver and one of the residents there. That was back in February or March of this past year. As a result of that, Public Works decided to withdraw service from Lakeview Park Road, and for it to be restored, it was said that an LSA had to be put in place. The residents, I've been involved since that time. The residents have been working on an LSA with the local supervisor. There have been some issues recently that have come up. The residents are looking to investigate other options like purchase of the land or having it rezoned, those kinds of things. And this is simply seeking an extension because the snow is coming, for them to be able to canvass and investigate their options over the course of this winter to be able to put either a proper LSA in place or be able to fully investigate and potentially implement another option that may be of interest to those residents. The snow had been plowed there for some 50 years. And it's important also to make sure that staff are safe. I understand that. And this particular resident has certainly been spoken to by his neighbors and is aware of the consequence of his action. And we can also be open to some additional safety measures if that needs to be the case. But really, snow plowing is a service that's necessary and required. And after this long period of time, to have it withdrawn and then not restored until an LSA in place, I think they could be forgiven for seeking some extra time to make sure that's all put in place to their satisfaction and other options explored if necessary. Thank you.
Councillor Smeet.
I just had for Councillor Perry, he and I spoke to this and I had some confusions on it. And I just wanted to make sure I was clear that a consequence was issued, which was, someone was feeling threatened. And so staff, the director of their staff looked out for them and said, that's not going to happen here. And the consequence issued was, you won't have snowplow removal until we have an LSA. So my question still is, it's been 8 months. Does it normally take 8 months to get an LSA in place? Because I need to know that to make a sound decision. And I understand that snowplow removal is an essential service. I understand that. I just need to know that. I have one follow-up question. I understand the inter alia piece that was put in the memorandum, that those other things you referred to, I get. I'm just curious.
LSAs can take an inordinately long time. I'll give the director a chance to speak to it. I'm not saying that it is the problem of Public Works. It is often the problem of the residents on the road, trying to get them all to agree, and some of them not understanding what they're signing and that kind of thing. But yes, it can take a long time. Director, do you want to say anything?
Sure, I had a couple comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to the council. Yeah, they can take a long time. Mayor's absolutely right. Generally what it is about tracking down and finding the legal owner of the property. If in this particular case, the owners are no longer available to sign the agreement, so they're looking at forming a cottage association. That takes time, goes through the legal process. We provided them with a draft limited service agreement back in March of this year. So they've been working in the background to try to establish, ownership and establish that association for some time. Again, there is hesitation going back in, noting what happened in the past. If council directs staff to resume service, absolutely, we will resume service and follow the direction of council. So I have spoken with the representative directly recently. I have a level of comfort that they are being proactive and trying to move towards a resolve here. Do I wish it was in place now? Absolutely, I do. But we're in the situation we're in.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Richardson.
Thank you, and through you, maybe just a question. Is this a contracted route or is this internal route?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, this is performed by our staff. So what we had done last year to resume service is the individual who was involved in the incident was removed from the route, and we placed another piece of equipment on that site with a different operator to get us through the winter. Again, with the expectations that we're going to be moving forward to the LSA. I just wanted to, I guess, reiterate that this is not a punitive measure. We are working to in place LSAs on the majority of these roads wherever possible. The reason this was put in place at the time was triggered by the incident, but it is definitely something that we need to have and should have in place whenever we're entering into private property.
Thank you, and I'm encouraged to hear that we have put our staff members' safety in front, and also the fact that you feel a level of comfort as we move forward through this process. What kind of extension are you looking for, Councillor Perry?
As per the memo, it would simply be during the season, so that their assured plowing season to get them through if needed. And again, it's part of it's the LSA, as Director Robinson and the Mayor noticed. Part of it too is investigating some other options that take time for perhaps there's another resolution that come to fruition. Again, time will tell, and I know the residents in my ward on Lakeview Park Road would appreciate that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for this? Councillor McDonald. All in favor? That goes forward. We're now going to do decision units, and I don't think we want to get into a debate on the decision units today. So it's just whether these memos are going to be forwarded for a decision unit or they're not. So item 8.2, memorandum regarding decision units for the draft 2024 budget for the City of Kawartha Lakes from Councillor Perry. That these recommendations be brought forward for consideration at the next regular council meeting. And obviously that they be received. Mover, I assume Councillor Perry, you're moving that?
Yes, please, Mayor.
And a seconder? Councillor Ashmore. All in favor? And those go forward. Second one, Councillor Ashmore's memo regarding decision units for the draft 2024 budget for the City of Kawartha Lakes, that it be received and that these recommendations be brought forward for consideration at the next regular council meeting. Is there a seconder to Councillor Ashmore? Councillor Joyce, all in favor? And those go forward. 8.4 is memorandum from Councillor Smeaton regarding decision units to be received, and that these recommendations be brought forward for consideration at the next regular council meeting. I assume Councillor Smeaton, you're moving that. And seconder, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? And that goes forward. And 8.5 is a memorandum from Deputy Mayor Richardson regarding decision units, and that be received, and that these recommendations be brought forward for consideration at the next regular council meeting. And Deputy Mayor is moving it. Oh, you want to speak to it?
No, I'm not going out. There's just a clerical error on the paved shoulder requests for Frank Hill Road starting at the S bend at Lawrence Street. So we missed Frank Hill Road in there.
Which one is that?
Second that.
The paved shoulder request?
Yes, it's Frank Hill Road starting at Lawrence Street South.
Thank you. Clerks will note that and have it amended. Seconder for that? Councillor Warren. All in favor? And that's passed. And finally, Councillor Warren, memorandum for decision units be received and that it be forwarded for consideration at the next regular council meeting. I assume you're moving that, Councillor Warren. Seconder? Councillor Smeaton. All in favor? And that's passed. I think we're finished.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Emmett, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the various memorandums, I guess. And part of the deal to bring these memorandums for decision units was to have financing for them, and I don't see any finance. So I'm just wondering, or want to be sure that when it does come to council or budget for these decision units, that the councillors will have
when
funding those, or where the funds
yeah.
are going to come from for it. So I just want to be sure that was asked for.
Emmett, the decision units are going to staff, and they will put a costing on it, so that when it comes to budget deliberations, we'll have numbers to go with it.
Yeah, I realize that, but I just want to make sure that the councillors have some idea where that money's going to come from.
And that was my, those were kind of my instructions going in, but they don't seem to have resonated. So we are where we are.
Well, thanks for that. I would have brought a whole laundry list of that and known that was going to happen. But
I
thank
have
you.
a motion to adjourn. Councillor Yeo and Councillor Warren, all in favor? Thank you.